Good morning, everyone. Let's stand for a moment of silence, and let's keep Court's Father in our prayers and thoughts this morning. And now the pledge. I
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll begin with the approval of minutes for February 26th. Commissioners,
Motion to approve.
Second.
first and second, any comments? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 5-0. Commissioners' reports and comments. Vice President Baker, would you begin?
Sure. I'd like to start just a couple of comments on the professional court bridge along with Yale Way out there. And I'd like to ask Rob to possibly provide some information. And I'd like to maybe have a presentation for everyone in open session about the total cost that we have in Yale Way out there and along with the professional court bridge. And just so we have some accurate dollars. I know there's millions upon millions of dollars invested out there. And I'd also like to see off of the Yale Drive project some of the current revenue that we're receiving now after building that road probably, I don't know, 6-7 years ago whenever we built that road. I know we have millions and millions and millions of dollars in that project, and I don't sense there's any urgency for development. And just like to see what's in the pipeline and some future some projects are being proposed there. Also, based on the amount of money that we have in that project out there, how much investment is going to actually have to occur for us to be able to get our money back, and how long that could possibly take. Also, I think it would be good for the chief to come in and provide us an update in open session and let the citizens know what's actually taking place out there, what we're getting for our investment. And so I'd just like to have an update on that Yale Drive property, Mount Etna Farms. I know I think it's 161 acres. I think they pay about $860 a year in taxes. And I think of that $860, the county might get, and I don't know the exact numbers, around $750. So I know we're getting that every year on the $15 million investment. So I'd just like to get some information on that.
Yes, sir.
Also, I know we've talked about Parks and Rec, combining the two, getting recreation out of human resources. And maybe, I don't know, maybe the next meeting you could provide us with some information as to how we could possibly combine the two organizations or the departments and find some efficiency and maybe some cost savings, because we're going to need a lot of money here in the future years. So maybe we could have some sort of a new organizational chart presented to the commissioners. And also, the commissioners, you have a letter, Pipeline and Water Protection Act of 2019. The River Keepers have sent this out, and they've asked us to review it. And I think they're probably going to be presenting it this week. Kirk, is it the 7th or something like that? They're going to be presenting it maybe to the House to try to, yeah. But anyhow, you have the letter there on the Pipeline and Water Protection Act, and I think they would like for the commissioners to take a position on this letter. So maybe we could review the letter and maybe make a decision tonight if we want to support it or not.
Pardon me. Only comment, would I'd like to check with their delegation to see where their position, because this is not a county bill, this is a state bill, correct? Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Yeah, but it would still be important for the commissioners to have their voice heard, or if they're going to support it or not. And I know for me, if I'm the only one supporting it, I still want the letter sent stating that I personally support it. Thank you.
Commissioner Kiefer?
Well, I would like to thank three groups of people that I've interacted with quite a bit in the last week in particular. One is the city, and I thank them for their invite to their State of the City that was held this morning. I thought they had a great presentation. And in speaking with several of the council members, the mayor, the comment was made of the good working relationship that our body has with their body. I think that's great for our community. Hagerstown certainly is the hub city for a reason. It's the hub of activity in Washington County. So I think continuing to build on that relationship is a good thing, and I thank them for their invite. I'd like to thank staff, and a few staff members in particular. I know I'm forgetting something, but how quick staff responds to us at times I think is quite impressive. Last night I sent an email to Sarah, and I was quite surprised at how quickly I got a response, and the detailed response I got. I asked for some financial calculations to help me understand a few things that a citizen had asked on with regards to the school budget of all things. And I just asked for clarification, and I was proctoring a midterm exam last night between my 8:30 to 11 p.m. class. So I was close towards 11 p.m. and I'm sending Sarah an email. And when I send an email, that's generally because I don't need a response right away. I can wait. But within like 10 minutes, I think I had all the answers that I needed. I was just so amazed with that. And then I came in yesterday needing a letter of support for a bill that I wanted to express my support for, and wasn't quite sure who to address it to. And unfortunately, the deadline was today, so I didn't have much time. And Krista helped me out right away and got everything ready for me. Just dropped what she was doing to help me out. So I appreciate staff's quick response. And it's not just those two staff members, it's many staff members that help drop what they're doing to help us out. So thank you for that. And our fire and rescue companies as well. I've had maybe 6 companies reach out to me since our discussion last week. I know we have a big decision maybe today we'll be making. And I really appreciate when those companies reach out and offer to help me and give me advice. That helps me make a good decision. I'm not a firefighter or an EMT. I've done ride-alongs with many of our companies, and I've seen it firsthand. But when you can reach out to me and share me your thoughts and ideas, that helps me make a better decision. So all the input that I got from those companies, I just want to say thank you because, again, it helps me do my job better for our citizens. That's all.
Wirt, would you like to go next?
Just 2 things I want to update everybody, or actually third. First, I want to thank the roads crew for yesterday's snow. Did an amazing job, only allowing a 2-hour delay for our students of Washington County, the Board of Ed. So they did a great job with that. So thank you for that. Second, I know I've talked about this since the very beginning, but downtown Hagerstown on the first Sunday of every month, the church, John Wesley United Methodist, has been walking to a restaurant to just have lunch. On this past Sunday, we had about 30 people walk to lunch in the snow downtown Hagerstown. We went to Pizza and Pretzels Creation, and when we walked in there, of course, it's snowing. There was 2 people, then all of a sudden we had 30 people in that restaurant on a Sunday afternoon. I would again invite all the other churches to do this. It's a very small thing, but again, there's a lot of churches in Washington County, just downtown Hagerstown, that we could have 100, 120 people walking in downtown on a Sunday. The first Sunday of April, we are actually going to be walking to 28 South to have lunch there. So I wanted to let everybody know about that. The second thing, wanted to say thank you to Craig Campbell with the Boys and Girls Club. He is starting a fundraiser, and I'm going to be participating in. I will be rappelling off the Alexander House building in downtown Hagerstown on April 6th for a fundraiser. So if you would like to support me and my plummet to death on April 6th, that day,
Water under
that would help. So for April 6th, but it's a good cause, so I have to go out and say it's called, I think it's Over the Edge for the Boys and Girls Club. So thank you.
Morning. This is actually my 3rd month anniversary of being sworn in as a commissioner. This job is all what I thought it would be, and more. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us. I'm trying to get up to running speed still. On a challenging budget, we have to find a way to help fire rescue, EMS, Washington County Public Schools, economic development. So it is challenging. So bear with us. We got some of the best staff ever working on things that we can come up with a solution that would be better than adequate, hopefully. I did attend the State of the City. I think we all were there this morning, the State of the City. They made some really good points. Court and I did, they mentioned the first 2+2, I think it's called, which Court and I met with to the City Council, Emma Keller and Shelley McIntyre. It went very well, cordial conversation, and we didn't do anything earth-shaking. But we're trying to, we really, and Rob's been helping, and we really want to establish a really smooth working relationship with the city. I think it's going to help us all with banding together as tight as we can. I think everybody forgets that the commissioners have a pretty good working relationship with the whole county. We all serve on commissions. For instance, I don't know, I know Court goes to Macon. I know Wayne, Terry, and Jeff. Jeff probably has 20. I serve on planning, ag preservation, Black Rock, Washington County Women's Commission, Health Advisory, Emergency Service, and Airport Advisory Board. So when you think we're not trying to keep up with what's going on, we are. I mean, it's a lot to absorb, but we're really trying to know exactly what's going on within the county. And I think the last thing I want to say and is I think they made a good point this morning at the State of the City. I don't want to be talking about something that was talked about 10 years ago, 10 years from now. I think the Court's expressed it. I've expressed it. I think we need to, everything costs money. That's the biggest problem. But I think we really need to take some quick steps to make things happen. I think we talk about things way too long, and I'm an offender of that sometimes, but it has to happen sooner than later. And obviously, it's always about the money. I realize that, but at least do something to help the process along. So anyway, that's all I have.
Thank you. I report, thank you guys for doing the 2-on-2. I think that was done in the 2006-10 board, the last time that was done. So I want to thank Court. Him and I attended the retirement committee meeting. Very interesting to see how things evolved. Again, the State of the City was an excellent presentation of a positive attitude in this county, as well was the Business Awards that was held last Friday evening. A very well representation of Washington County and the progress we're making. It's going to be my request to County Administrator Slocum. We seem to have some people interested in becoming line items in our budget from our community organization of funding. It will be my request that will be an agenda item that everybody who has applied or received money has the opportunity to come in on that time and make a presentation to see if they are eligible or could be included. I think that's the fair way to do it, or we get back to that awful Williamsport vote that was voted in session during citizens' participation. A full, fair disclosure and equal opportunity for every one of those groups to make an application to be on a line item. The history of the community funding organization was done back under the board in 2010 to 2014 to put a fair and equitable process together. Not everybody has the ear of 3 commissioners to persuade and lobby for extra money. Everybody's cause is passionate, but it is my request that everybody be given the same opportunity with an agenda item for full discussion and transparency. Thank you. That concludes my report. Now I'd like to go to reports from county staff.
Commissioner, back to your point there.
Now oh, go ahead.
Back to your point there, coming in and requesting as an agenda item, they still have the ability to come in and express their thoughts during
100%.
citizens' participation.
I'd just like to have a collective bargain and opinions of everyone who's involved in that process. And that way, I think we've done our job. Thank you for adding that. All right, reports from county staff. Anyone from county staff? Mr. Hobbs, please come forward. Gentlemen, please introduce yourself and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Andrew Eshelman, Director of Public Works.
Good morning, Scott Hobbs, Director of Engineering. We're here for a brief update on the South County flooding projects, specifically to the capital improvement projects here in the engineering department that Andrew and I have been working on with staff and contractors. The first is Garrett's Mill Road Bridge. Bridge has been fabricated and is scheduled to be placed next month. The contractor is currently working on the stream diversion and getting ready for the sub-foundation concrete. Project is scheduled to be completed in early May. The original schedule is late April due to the amount of rainfall over the last period of time we've had. We've been slowed a bit, but they're looking to make up the schedule here and moving forward in the spring. So we've updated that information on the website. That's one we get calls about a lot and share that with some of the neighbors there in the area. With Back Road, we have a project to reestablish, rebuild that roadway, and we're in the final design and plan on advertising that project later this month. That's a project that we'll have in early summer and completion in late fall, and that's to rebuild the road, shoulder work, and stream bank stabilization on Back Road. Also with Sandy Hook Road, the National Park Service is still working on the design and historic preservation process for the road and catchment wall and bank stabilization for the landslide area. They've told us they'll keep us updated as that moves forward, but they're still in that process. With that, I'll share if Andrew has everything else with highways.
Yes, on the Public Works side, we have received notification for first round of reimbursement costs for the debris removal. So those funds should be coming shortly in the amount of about $70,000. And we continue to work on the documentation that we need to do for the remaining reimbursement amount for other cleanup work that included road repairs, culvert replacements, and things of that nature.
Garrett's Mill Bridge, a lady called and you handled her concern.
Yes,
I'm very appreciative of your fast and rapid response.
sure.
So thank you for that. I called her and she had high compliments for that, and giving her the information helped her understand why in the process of that bridge being finalized. So thank you very much.
Sure. We'll continue to keep the property owners updated. And like I said, the websites, we have a link that provides the updates.
They may
as we
be
move
our
forward.
best form of communications as they talk amongst each other. So thank you.
Sure.
Scott, when we took the tour down there in South County after the flood and we were at the bridge, it was washed out, and we happened to look over to the right, and the 200 plus, maybe 300-year-old arch bridge was still standing over there, the old road. Who actually owns that property? Is that still the county's property where that old arch bridge was? I don't know if you recall or remember or not, but.
Yeah, with Chestnut.
Referring to Valley Road,
With Chestnut.
Chestnut Grove.
Yeah.
I think the old right-of-way was reverted to the property owner,
Okay.
but we could check.
I
on
just thought it would be neat if somehow clean it up around that arch bridge there, and as you ride over the new bridge, that I guess it's going to be replacing the new bridge that was washed out. I just think it would be interesting to be able to look over there and see that stone bridge, that old arch stone bridge that used to be the right of way, still standing.
Sure.
I just thought that was neat. Our bridge washed out, but that one, still testing the test of time.
Right.
So-
That goes along with our other stone arch bridges, Poffenberger Road, I'll bring before you. And there's missing, mortar and bulging spandrel walls and different things with the bridge.
Yeah.
But in all, for all the flooding that they take, they stand up the test of time.
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any other staff with reports? Seeing none, let's move on to citizens' participation. Front row, first row. All right, second row, citizens' participation. Please introduce yourself. Name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Ron Horn, 181 Stanford Road, Hagerstown, Maryland, and today I'm representing the president of the Antietam Fire Company.
Good morning. I'm Jim Sprecher, 116 Bester Street, Hagerstown, Maryland, Washington County. Past president of the Washington County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association, and almost 40-year responder with EMS and fire. I'd like to discuss two things with you quickly this morning. Number one is the fire plan. Ultimately, you are the authority having jurisdiction. You're responsible for health, safety, and welfare of our citizens, people that work and travel through Washington County. We, as your responders, stations, equipment, are just tools in your toolbox to make that happen. And some of the tools are getting old and tired. And we need to fund the fire plan adequately to accomplish safety for our residents and people working and traveling through. Secondly, as chairman of the board of the Antietam Fire Company, we reside at 790 Potomac Avenue. We were formed in 1808 as the Lafayette Fire Company. We've been doing this for more than a minute, and at some point in time when the county commissioner started funding the stations that reside in the county, we got 50% of the allotment that the county companies do. And 4 years ago, being proactive, we relocated to 790 Potomac Avenue on the north side of the railroad tracks that run through Hagerstown. There was never a station located within the city limits on that side of the railroad tracks, so we moved out there to be proactive, and we took a lot of debt and a lot of maintenance. We come before you asking for the equal allotment that the county companies get. We're often considered a city company. We reside within the city. Our geographic location is in the city, but we respond a lot into the county. And we are no more a city fire company than the library on the corner is the city's library, or this facility being located geographically in the city belongs to the city. And we would just like for you to consider funding us equally as the other county companies.
I'd like to ask a question.
Or if you may.
I guess you'll have to refresh my memory as to what percentage of that 50% you're funded, and what percentage of that 50% you're funded, and I can't remember
We
why.
get 24,000. The county companies get 48.
Okay, and what was the rationale behind that? I mean, I don't recall that.
It was, I think, past President Hill researched it, and in 1943, the county gave the city company $600, and this stations located within the corporate limits got $300. And it's been that way since. And times change. That deficit is just getting bigger and bigger over the years.
We probably respond to as many county calls as we do city calls now because of our location.
Just something to consider.
Just a curious question. Right now in your budget, how's it look? I mean, right now, what?
Last year, we took $13,000 out of our savings over our receipts. So anybody that manages your checkbook, and I'm sure Sarah would tell you, you can't continually take and spend beyond your receipts without
Spent
balance.
13,000 more than what you had last year.
Yes,
What you took in.
yes. So we've got maintenance out there with that bigger facility and responsibilities, so.
Any other questions for anybody? Okay, normally we don't take questions, but I appreciate that clarity.
No, that's great.
Any other comments?
Nope.
I'd like to make another comment on the second subject as far as a resident of Colonial Park. That bridge that you're considering not funding or whatever you think it's not feasible, if you take a look at the traffic count in Potomac Park on Cornell Avenue, I'm sorry, and it is in the thousands per day, and that is due to the hospital traffic. And when you open Yale Drive over to the college, that also brought more traffic, and it really needs to be done again to count and the speed through there. That bridge is going to relieve a lot of the traffic through our neighborhood, and it's not, it's a busy place, and there's a lot of kids out in that area. Plus, down at the bottom of the hill where the three-way stop sign is, people go through the stop signs. It's a three-way stop sign. They go through them all the time. It just needs to be relieved. Plus, for the emergency services, the ambulances to get to the hospital coming from the north end and some partially from the east end, that is a safer way to get there and a quicker way. And I really believe when you open it up, the businesses will come there. Thank you.
I have a question real quick, if that's okay. Mr. Sparker, I'm sure you would know as past president of the association, in Hancock, where I live, our town contributes a nominal amount to our fire and rescue. Is that true of all of our communities? I know the city of Hagerstown contributes. Don't.
I couldn't tell you about the county companies and what their contribution is from the municipalities.
I know different municipalities do fund their companies in a different way. We don't pay for the career people there. That's the big thing. But we do help with the expenses of buying apparatus and everything and housing the career people there and the expenses of that too.
And I guess where I was going with that is, in a way, a precedent's already been set for companies located in a municipality to receive some kind of, I know a lot of our companies don't have that benefit of being in a municipality, but there's other companies that receive community funding and get that full allotment.
Sure. All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to remind the commissioners that we're here just to take comments. I don't want to try to stifle your questioning, but we start asking questions amongst everyone. We'll be here to length of time, which also would mean it should be an agenda item. All right, back to citizens' participation. I think we just did the second row. Third row, please come forward. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
My name's Lorraine O'Connor. I live in Keedysville, Maryland, 30 Yankee Drive. I am a
Gotcha.
senior citizen, and I'm here to talk about the needs of the senior citizens that are partially being met by the senior center. I've gone there. I've had my badge changed 4 times, so at least 3 years I've been there. There are several of you up there that are eligible to join, from what I'm seeing. Anyone 55 or older.
Come on now.
Yeah, I get my
Okay.
magazine.
Not quite.
Our center is beautiful. It's very nice. Our director will be talking to you. She's on your list. One of the concerns that we have as members of the senior center is that I read the articles as you were proposing to build the new one and all the drama over where it was going to be built. And that when the article that came out in the Herald that said that this would be free to all senior residents of Washington County. And, we went there, and my husband used the gym. We went to some of the presentations, very nice that you have attorneys come in and talk about matters that concern seniors. I attend 2 classes a week. And I provide all of my own supplies. All these students that take the art classes provide all of their own supplies. They want to charge us $5 per class to sit in that room. They don't provide anything. All the teachers are volunteer except for the yoga teacher. They have to pay her. And the people that take those classes pay a couple of dollars each class. For us to take the art classes and sit in that room, they want to charge each person $5 for the use of the room. Not that they're paying the teachers, not that they're supplying us with paintbrushes and paints or paper. They supply us with nothing. But they feel justified in charging us $5 to use the room. And at first, I paid it, but then we added a second class, which we made up on our own. And one of the ladies, who's a retired art teacher, said yes, she would teach it. They gave us a time slot that was available that no one was using the room. Oh, now you have to pay $5 for that. Well, that's $10 a week. You add up how much that comes to a year because we're using an empty room. Now, I understand they charge for the piano, the keyboard, and that makes sense because the keyboards have to be paid for and you have to maintain them if they break. But that teacher also volunteers, as does the guitar teacher, as does the vocal teacher. You have people that play cards, that play games in the game room. They want to now charge them for sitting in the game room playing cards because you all are not funding the senior center. Now, we still pay taxes. We don't live here for free. And I'm going to guess she'll tell you what the percentage population-wise are senior citizens. We are still a viable part of this community. We do a lot of volunteering. Some of us have part-time jobs. And I don't think that it is unreasonable that I should be able to go to my senior center and make new friends and sit and chat while I'm taking an art class or I'm sewing or I'm sitting playing cards and not have to pay $5 every time I walk into the room. It's unfair. It's not how it was presented to people when it was written up and when it was opened. And you need to keep that in line. I understand they want to be a line item so we're not an afterthought. If you have money left over, you give it to the center. I don't understand the legalities. I know for some reason you have to have a Department of Aging in order to be eligible for funding from, I don't know, state or federal. You have to provide a senior center in order to be eligible for some funding, but apparently it's not enough to keep it open. We're grown adults. Some of us were pillars in our community. We're pretty okay to go into a room by ourselves. We don't need a monitor, so I'm not sure how much you have to pay for people to watch what we're doing or let us in and out every day. It shouldn't be that much. All the cost should be is for the actual rent for the facility and the utilities. So when she comes up here and she gives you all the statistics, I think we should be on the light item. We should have been on it altogether. Why you would build a center and set it up and then not fund it from year to year makes absolutely no sense to me. Okay? I thank you for the facility, but also we have outgrown the facility. We have people being turned away. I am one of them who can't take the exercise classes because the room is too small and there are too many seniors that want to take exercise classes. And from a healthcare point of view, I am a nurse. You want your seniors to take exercise classes. It helps them. It makes them feel better. It has them less medical complications, less use of the emergency room if everybody who is a senior is given ample opportunity to exercise, ample opportunity to socialize, and they also want to start charging for people to come there. And many of the women and men that I have met since I've been coming to the center for well over 3 years would not be able to come if they had to pay to do so. They are on fixed incomes. And then you would make the center an elitist thing.
I don't mean to interrupt you or limit your comments, but we would like to keep your comments
Okay.
limited because I probably.
All right, yeah, I'm coming
If
to-
you need more time, you take it. I just
coming
want
to the
to
end.
let everybody else know we probably have 20 other people waiting and we have other items, but I
Okay.
want you to think I'm cutting you off, okay?
All right, but
I
I'm just
wanna
letting you
hear-
know, I'm a nurse. From a healthcare point of view, I have seen people who have come in, humped over, pushing little walkers, and after interacting with people, they suddenly come in with a big smile on their face. They suddenly feel better. So there are a lot of things that happen as a result of using the senior center that are beneficial to the citizens. Therefore, you should support the senior center so it can stay open and so they aren't nickel and diming the people that use it. Again, it was supposed to be free. It should still be free. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in that row or second row, please come forward. State your name and address, please.
Kevin Demmons, 13,514 Kretzinger Road, Smithsburg.
Good morning, Ward Flager, 109 Colton Court, Town of Smithsburg.
I'm here before you to speak on the growing EMS crisis in Washington County, where the system is on the brink of collapse. The county currently has a staffing and funding issue regarding EMS. We have providers who are leaving for other counties nearby. We have transport units going out understaffed or coming from much further away than they should be, all as we keep doing our best to maintain a system that is failing the patients and citizens of Washington County. How did we get here? Approximately 10 years ago, we all signed the EMS master plan to receive financial assistance with staffing as the volunteers were no longer able to adequately handle the call volumes on their own. Nationwide, over the years, times have changed. Volunteerism is down. Training alone is over 300 hours just to get started. When I joined Smithsburg EMS in 2007, our station had over 37,000 hours of volunteer time from 58 volunteers. In 2018, we had 16 volunteers, of which only 5 to 10 are considered active, and those hours are now just 5,300. So with volunteer hours trending down, we had one full-time paramedic on staff, 24/7, 365, and we utilized part-time staffing for both paramedics and EMTs, as well as volunteers to fill the schedule, leaning towards volunteers as much as we could to cut costs. As less and less volunteers were available, we had to shift to more part-time staffing. Eventually, we reached a point where the schedule was approximately 90% paid staffing and 10% volunteers. At the same time, we noticed the part-time staffing was becoming more unreliable, much like we had seen from the volunteers. This is because many of our part-time staff were working full-time elsewhere in the county, and at 8 a.m., they would leave one station and go to another station. We finally reached a point where we had to add more full-time staffing to ensure we could meet our coverage requirements in Smithsburg. Unfortunately, about 2 years ago, we noticed even that was no longer working. So 2 years ago, we were about 99% paid staffing, 1% volunteer filling the schedule. It was at that time we recognized a major issue. Providers were working multiple stations to support themselves and the stations. We saw an increase in burnout. The system was crumbling. The system was heading towards a crisis. Providers were leaving for nearby counties with better pay and defined benefits. At Smithsburg EMS, we're paying quite a bit of overtime and still struggling to maintain the schedule. When people work multiple stations and someone calls out, there's a trickle effect. Paramedic 1 from Company 1 calls out, so then Company 1 has to hold over their paramedic or call another paramedic in to cover. Well, that paramedic was already scheduled at Company 2, so he calls off, and so on and so on. At Smithsburg EMS, we recognized this trend, made the bold move to switch to a full-time shift schedule for every day so we could maintain 24/7, 365 coverage for our community. It had to be done to ensure the citizens were provided with quick and highly trained professionals at a moment's notice. Unfortunately, this has cost Smithsburg EMS greatly in terms of finances. The savings we had once built up to replace equipment and vehicles has been used up. Looking forward, we can no longer afford to maintain this path we're on from 2009. The EMS system in Washington County is nearing total collapse. According to Phase 1 of the EMS Master Plan, we are given $213,900 each year to help us make payroll. Along with our billing revenue, we total approximately $500,000 to pay for staffing each year. At Smithsburg EMS, we staff one ALS ambulance with a paramedic and an EMT 24/7, 365. We also have an operations director who is there every day to support echo and paramedic chase to our surrounding areas, much like the 1811 and 1812 do in other areas of the county. That accounts for approximately 10% of our call volume. And we still have part-time employees to handle days off and help fill the schedule where needed. With that in mind, we spend much over the $500,000 allotted for staffing per year in payroll and benefits. To offset that, we have shifted money from other places to support payroll and benefits and have cut spending anywhere and everywhere we could. In addition to the savings measures you've heard from Director Hayes and others, at Smithsburg, we've cut out all spending not related directly to our mission, which is to save lives. We currently have several projects that need completed, including but not limited to replacing or repairing an aging shed on our property that is nearly falling down and leaks. Unfortunately, that still isn't enough. With 83% of the calls in the county being for EMS, we cannot afford to put the system on the back burner. We believe the solution to the problem is a county staff system. Every day we lose providers to surrounding counties, ones who have stability and defined benefits. With most or all counties surrounding us already staffing this way, they don't really have far to go. We have great providers here. We should be doing our best to retain them. They have supported the system throughout its stages of growth and despair. At Smithsburg, we only recoup approximately 15% of our fund drive. If that was even 90%, we would not be having this conversation about funding. I can easily say, as a tax-paying citizen of Washington County, I support a sustainable revenue source such as a fire rescue EMS tax. I would be 100% behind funding that would ensure when I need to call 911 for someone I know that help is coming and it's not understaffed and it's not coming from an additional 20 minutes away because people aren't available. As we near total system failure, we are gambling with people's lives. While we truly appreciate what you have done for us in the past, it's now time to look forward to the future. Thank you.
Ward, do you have some comments? I don't want to, again, I don't want to stifle your opportunity to talk, but we do want to keep these comments 3 to 5 minutes for all because there's a lot of
Absolutely,
people.
sir. Respectfully, if I could
Please
just say my
continue, but,
piece. I represent Ward Flager, Assistant Chief with Smithsburg Emergency Medical Services. I'm the operations guy. I'm the guy that goes on all those chase calls. I enjoy it thoroughly. It's very fulfilling and rewarding. I'm going to cut to the chase with what I have to say. It's very hard, truthful, factual stuff that I really have to share with you. I'm representing the Volunteer Fire Rescue Association as a co-chair of the EMS committee. I'm here to represent the 8 EMS companies of Washington County. I also represent the citizens of Washington County for what is best for them to keep them protected with emergency medical services. Within the past 5 years, the volunteer and part-time paid staffing has become totally unreliable. This has forced our companies to provide full-time staffing in efforts to keep our ambulances staffed and prevent us from failing on emergency response. This has become a financial hardship as our staffing budget has far exceeded our allowed subsidy funding received each year by the county. We can no longer financially manage or staff our ambulances on a daily basis. We are in a crisis. We are on a verge of collapse. We can no longer sustain the current system. We, as the 8 EMS companies, the Volunteer Association, the Division of Emergency Services, have united and unanimously voted to be absorbed as county employees. Regretfully, the time has arrived. In emergency medical comparisons, we have a major arterial bleed going on. We are putting Band-Aids on spurting arteries. We are at the point where the application of tourniquets is failing to control the bleed. We are bleeding out, literally. We are asking for help from the Board of County Commissioners for a temporary plan. We know a temporary plan is temporary. It will only prolong the agony even longer. Last year, in 2018, there were 30,258 incidents. 83% of those incidents were for emergency medical services. 17% were for fire incidents and other incidents. We have 2 requests, and they're very hard requests to ask. We ask, number 1, that you approve to move forward with the Phase 2 EMS fire plan. We have months, not years, we have months before we can no longer make the payroll. We're talking August, September of 2019 before we utilize all of our savings that we have. If we don't have some type of alternative source by that time of funding, we will literally hand Director Hayes the keys to the ambulances, and we will say we can no longer provide this for our communities. We do not want to do that. With respect to President Moncrief, we disagree with his statement last week. We do have a staffing problem. It is a crisis, and it's on the verge of collapse. Item number 2, the second request, we are requesting the Board of County Commissioners to move forward with a sustainable funding source. and that involves an EMS fire tax or some type of citizen user fee, whatever we want, terminology we want to have for that. We are hopeful for that change. If there is no intent to move forward for that sustainable revenue source, we are hopeful for a plan B, which could involve a citizens group to do a study in an unbiased report back to the commissioners for a recommendation. This funding source is unavoidable, and I'm referring to the EMS fire tax. We know that every division in the county is operating on bare bones, and we know that they cannot cut their budgets for us. We know it's tight. If properly educated, the citizens of Washington County will support this plan, and I know that they will praise the Board of County Commissioners for moving forward, for being progressive and being visionary. These items were also recommendations that came out of the SWOT study back in 2016. At the same time, we're hopeful that we can move forward with the master plan that we've talked about with both EMS and fire. In wrapping up, I'll wrap up here real fast. The EMS committee has made valiant efforts to help save the taxpayers' money. Some of the items that we've done, we've moved forward to initiate a centralized billing for our transports. Prior to that, we had 8 companies having 8 different agencies doing our billing for us. It's much more cost effective if we have one billing company billing for the ambulance transports. We've centralized purchasing for medical supplies and equipment. Before, again, everybody was doing their own thing, wasting taxpayers' money on things that we can consolidate, such as medical supplies, heart monitors, ambulances, and items like that. We're also working towards a single insurance provider that can help us with workman's compensation in our health care. In closing, I do want to compliment our workforce in representing our eight agencies, the paramedics and the EMTs. I'm hopeful that we can retain these providers. We need to embrace and value them and provide them with a stable career by making them county employees. We need to provide them with a pension. We need to provide them with benefits and retain them as a valued investment for our community. I work with these people. They're behind me. I see what they do every day. They're the best of the best. Last, I've been in the EMS fire business for 40 years. It's a mess. It's a huge mess. We have a big challenge on our hands. We're not your enemy. We're all on the same team. Our plan is to work through this together. And finally, closing, public safety is an expensive business. When a citizen calls 911, it's usually the worst day in their life. It's up to us to come in there, provide advanced life support, provide those rapid interventions to make their life better, to stabilize them. We cannot place a dollar amount at the cost of someone's life. That's what we're all about. The citizens deserve the very best. We can build a credible response model together that provides a performance guarantee. As long as we strive for that goal, we'll be successful in this endeavor. That's my words. Again, thank you very much for this time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just so everyone knows, not trying to stifle your input, but we are running way behind, but we will continue citizens' participation. Next in that row, name and address, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Timothy Gargana, 228 Hadley Drive in Falling Waters, West Virginia. Good morning, and thank you for taking the time. More importantly, I've been a resident of Washington County for 51 years, recently moving to Falling Waters for various reasons and out of the state of Maryland. But even more importantly, I've been an EMS provider, a paramedic, an EMT, a frontline supervisor, a firefighter in this Washington County system for over 30 years. I agree with the previous presenters that the EMS system in Washington County is indeed in a crisis. I strongly disagree with President Moncrief in his last presentation. EMS has put a Band-Aid on this system in the form of EMS billing, cutting revenues, cutting expenses, things like that. I can tell you, I agree with Mr. Sprecher. Our providers are tired and we're worn out, and we do need assistance. There are some short-term fixes you as commissioners can do. There are some long-term fixes. We discussed the workman's compensation issue. Each company, or the companies in total, pay over $80,000 a year in workman's compensation. $800,000 a year in workman's compensation fees for their employees as individual corporations. That's a quick fix, a very quick fix. The long-term fix, you've heard it before, a sustainable funding source. That's what this system needs, and that is your job to find that. And it's also your job to develop a delivery model and delivery role. Is it through DMS or DES? Is it through the individual corporations? I don't have the answers to that, but that delivery model has to be developed and found out. Through my conservative background and values, I step up and I own my mistakes. And I think my mistake and the mistakes of many people behind me is we haven't been presenting ourselves to you as commissioners over the last 10 years. We've let this problem fester and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we've just put a Band-Aid on it and kind of dealt with it. Well, the Band-Aid's slowly coming off. And I can assure you, myself and the people behind me will not make that mistake again. You'll see us, okay? You're gonna get hit with $1.9 million today by the Board of Education. We understand those fees, and we certainly sympathize with those. Our children's education is of utmost important, but we're dealing with lives and people's homes and livelihoods, and it's a life and death situation. So again, thank you. We appreciate it. We appreciate you listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone from that same row, citizens participation? Come forward, state your name. Same row, second row? Anyone in the third row? Please come forward. Please state your name and address.
My name is Tim Darberg. I'm an Executive Director Controller at Meritus, and I'm also on the Commission of Aging Board as Treasurer and Secretary.
I'm Amy Olak, CEO of the Washington County Commission on Aging, representing the Commission on Aging at 535 East Franklin Street in Hagerstown.
And I'm Bill Beard. I'm currently the President of the Board of the Commission on Aging.
Commissioners, I'd like to take this opportunity to start by thanking each of you for your support over the years through your funding of our agency, as well as your acknowledgement of services, presence at events, and most recently, the beautiful building for which we house a majority of our 50-plus programs. Each of you have had an opportunity to speak with me individually, and I appreciate your time in doing so. But today, I want to present to you some facts about what makes the Commission on Aging unique in our county, but also as a potential line item for your budget. The Older Americans Act of 1965 put into place in response to the concern of policymakers about the lack of community services for older Americans. The Area Agency on Agings were established in 1973 as a part of that Older Americans Act as on-the-ground organizations charged with helping vulnerable adults live with independence and dignity in their communities. The Area Agencies on Agings across the state are made up of majority local government and a few nonprofits. We are one of 4 nonprofits in the state of Maryland. You're designated by the Area Agency Department of Aging, the Maryland Department of Aging, under federal statutory authority to provide a range of services to meet the needs of this expanding population. Each AAA is required to submit an area plan for their delivery of services to the Maryland State Department of Aging. We are required to project funding for 3 years at a time, and this year is our 3-year plan. Funding uncertainty through a competitive grant process makes this process, as you can imagine, very difficult. The Maryland Department of Aging provides audits of each of our programs for compliance and quality, and also provides a financial audit annually. As I mentioned, we are only one of 4 in this state that is a nonprofit designated by a county government. While our programs such as information and assistance and nutrition are available to all older adults, The increase in the numbers of older adults and limited public funds necessitate that services be directed first to those older adults with the greatest social and economic need and those who may be at risk for institutionalization. The County Commissioners on March 12, 1973, voted unanimously to designate the Washington County Commission on Aging, then known as the Senior Citizens Incorporated, as the Commission on Aging's Area Agency on Aging for Washington County. According to the Federal Register, Volume 45, Number 63, dated March 31, 1980, the Area Agency on Aging must provide comprehensive and coordinated service systems that serve and advocate for seniors and those with disabilities in their service area. This federal mandate includes us providing congregate sites and a senior center, among other duties described therein. Senior centers, according to the Older Americans Act, is that community focal point, which has become in our county one of the most widely used services among older adults. On July 16, 1981, Mr. Martin L. Snook, President of the Board of the Washington County Commissioners, received the letter from the Maryland Department of Aging acknowledging the county's formal request to designate Washington County Commission on Aging as their Area Agency on Aging, effective October 1, 1981. Our agency has an entire advisory council for which you appoint. There are 10 advisory members appointed by the county commissioners that provide organizational oversight and direction. We also have a board of directors that consists of 13 members. Please remember that seniors are the fastest growing segment of our county's population and the nation. By 2030, 1 in 4 Washington County seniors will be 60 years or older. In Washington County alone, that is a 43.65% increase in the senior population between 2015 and 2030. We have been flat funded in the competitive grant process for 3 years. Counting now could potentially be the 4th. There are more seniors in our county than school-aged children countywide. We are already seeing this shift in the need to serve seniors. In 2018, we served over 7,400 Washington County citizens. The demands on our services are evident. As of yesterday, 174 individuals were on waiting list for services from our organization. An appointment is between 4 and 6 weeks to get service. What I'd like to say in summary is you can see that our agency provides a very valuable, federally mandated, and desired service for our county. Our 50-plus programs provide invaluable services and resources to assist seniors, caregivers, and those with disabilities remain independent as long as safely possible in their homes. Similar to your mandates for the library, Humane Society, Department of Social Services, Health Department, and others, we too are an essential agency to county functions. The competitive grant process isn't the place for essential agencies to find their core funding. Certainly, we can apply for special programming through that process just as the Humane Society does, but it should not be where we secure our county funds for our agency and the seniors that have paved the way. Today, we ask you to make a commitment to the seniors of Washington County. Support the agency that the county commissioners designated as the Area Agency on Aging by making the Commission on Aging and all of its programs included in the federal mandate a single line item in your budget. Plan for the future of the fastest growing segment of the population here in Washington County. Seniors are the ones that paved the way before us, as I designated for you in the history. You have an opportunity to secure the future of seniors and for yourself. Consider making us a dedicated line item in your budget, and I thank you for your time and consideration of that request.
Thank you.
Gentlemen,
Yeah, just a few comments to, again, first of all, thanks to Amy and her staff for working through this for the past 4 years. I've been in finance for over 35 years, and to do flat funding on a population growth that is, the volume of people that they're servicing has been very challenging. As a citizen mentioned earlier, you know, these fees we have to start charging aren't going to change if this profile continues. That's the reality. It's a little bit of a misnomer that the senior center, it's a beautiful facility, but we have 50 to 60 other programs that we actually fund that are not bricks and mortar. Amy mentioned the waiting list. One of those is Meals on Wheels. We have over at any point in time for 50 to 70 people that are waiting just to get fed. And it's important to remember that Meals on Wheels is not just about feeding people. That's obviously an important aspect of that program, but it's actually usually these seniors' only touch point of the day to find out if they're healthy, to knock on the door to make sure that there's nothing wrong with them outside of just needing, you know, the pure necessities of food. I think that's important to understand that. And again, the numbers are there. This is a growing population, not just in this county, but across our whole society as a whole. The other thing that I'll mention is many people are aware that if you are a government employee, you typically still are lucky enough to have a defined benefit pension. Most people don't have that anymore. They are living on 401ks. So you basically have people that, if depending on what the market does as they retire, they're not going to get a guaranteed stream of funding. This is the resource they are going to use, and it's critical to them ultimately to be able to survive as decent human beings going forward. Thank you.
Right, and just to kind of sum up, not to stifle you, but we're half an hour behind, and I'd like to get to everybody. But
The only thing I would add, Jeff, is that to point out that the senior center, which is our shiny object, is only one of 50 programs. We have the senior center plus 49 other programs, several of which are mandated by the state. We have the waiting list, which Tim and Amy have talked about. We have volunteers standing by to deliver meals to people, but we don't have funds to buy the food for the people. So we hope that you will entertain Amy's request. And the Commission on Aging is well managed, efficiently managed, has a good reputation in the community, and it needs your help. Thank you.
Yeah, just one other thing. We basically just want to be treated like other organizations in other counties in Maryland. We're not asking for anything out of the ordinary of what other counties are doing. Thank you.
Just a comment, and this is for Amy. Amy, I think under your leadership down there at our senior center, you've done an exemplary job. I know when I became a county commissioner in 2006, we didn't have a senior center. Over the years, they had the seniors located everywhere. Then we talked about building the facility out at HCC, and at that time I thought that was the place to build it, and that was my mindset at that time. I thought the seniors that would go out there and participate would be just, you know, well received within the county. But under your leadership, your staff, your committees that are put together, I will have to say the senior center down there where it's located is the right place to be. And I just think just the way it's grown and everybody that's participated to get it to the level, I never, ever in my wildest dreams thought that the senior center would be as successful as it is. So congratulations and keep up the great work. So.
And I know we're running behind. I do have a quick question.
I'd like to move on though, gentlemen. Okay.
Amy, to your board members, thank you for your leadership. As I said before, and in all seriousness, I'm not a senior, but I hope to be one day if I live long enough, and then I will probably be using your services. Same thing with court, I would think so. But
What about me?
You're already there.
He's already a user.
But thank you for your leadership and the service you provide to seniors. I've been on the Meals on Wheels ride along. I interact with the senior citizens that you serve. You're a compassionate organization, and I think what's certainly unique about our senior center and Commission on Aging, if you put your hands up and walked away, you become a county organization, the services you provide, and that automatically will put you in as a line item, or a new 501c3 would have to form. So thank you for expressing how unique you are compared in relation to the other organizations that we fund, the library, the Hagerstown Community College, that we have that obligation to provide line item funding. You're unique and you do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
And President Klein, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak again as a budget line.
Well, everything you just heard, I support. The battle to get the senior center built, 5 different groups trying to find it from downtown, a rock pile on a college, and I don't know why Bill Wyville allowed us to accept our property on the college. But thank you for all you do out there. And again, I'd like for all this to be on an agenda item so we can take in consideration your request.
And I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Just real quick, would I be able to get a list of the programs that are federally mandated?
I can actually even give you a copy of the Federal Register that I referred to. I'd be
Okay.
happy to do that.
That'd be perfect. Thank you.
You're very
All
welcome.
right, thank you.
And one last thing, Rob, when can she, what does she do, reach out to you? And when could we expect her to be on the agenda?
Well, I'd like for all the applicants and people receive, so there will be some time to make sure
Well,
they all know
we're
about it.
talking about the seniors right now.
We can do this through Susan Buchanan's office and provide the same message to everyone unless,
Okay, well, I think he said that he would like to have the seniors come in with a presentation. I don't know why it couldn't be in 2
I'd like
weeks.
for all the groups to be combined, who all at the same time make the same information
Well, I
to
thought
do
you were,
that.
I thought
And
earlier.
that's what I
gentlemen,
said
we
in
can,
my comments.
we can run parallel paths here.
I'm
I
asking
can
you to
talk
agree with me on that.
today.
You might be the only group.
That's fine. I'll be happy
Okay?
to
We'll
represent.
work with everybody to make it accommodating. Thank you. Now, I want to move on. I hate to cut you short, but I like to ask the commissioners or the citizens, is it okay that we move with the Board of Education presentation? They've been waiting patiently for 30 minutes. If there's anyone who's here for citizens' participation in a hurry, please raise your hand and tell me. I'll come right to you, but I'd like to get to the Board of Ed. Seeing none, Board of Ed, please come forward and introduce yourself.
Morning, Commissioners. Jeff Prude, Chief Operating Officer of Washington County Public Schools. With me this morning is David Brandenburg, Executive Director of Finance. What we have in front of you this morning is the second quarter of FY 2019 budget adjustments. Code of Maryland regulation requires that we reforecast revenues and expenses periodically to reflect actual business, and that is what you have in front of you. It's worth noting that the changes in front of you do amount to approximately 0.3% of the total operating fund, and the changes are to meet the needs of the current school system, or the current needs of the school system. And we can answer any questions you may have on the line items.
Got one quick question for you. On the savings, it says $516,469 in savings and contributions to the health insurance fund due to changes in subscriber mix.
So the subscriber mix, of course, is for each of our employees that are eligible to enter into our insurance benefits plan. There are 3 tiers of the plan, as well as there are 3 or multiple ways an employee can enter the plan. I might come in as a single, just myself as the employee, with a spouse, with children, or a full family plan. What we realized in FY19 is a savings to the Board of Ed's contributions based on how employees are choosing to enroll in the program. We had a shift of individuals moving from family plan to spousal employee and spouse, or just employee coverage. We also had a reduction in the number of employees that are actually using our plan, whether that's because they've left the system, the economy's good, and they're with a spouse on their plan outside the system. Could be any number of reasons. You may also recognize from our budget presentation, this is a place where we actually are reallocating money in FY20 to reallocate to other programs. There is a risk in moving this money here and also in the FY20 budget that if that subscriber mix shifts back the other way, we could be upside down on our program.
Actually, it looks to me, under medical insurance, that you're asking for $1.63 million more next year. But we're asking for 516 to be moved out of it because of savings. And I guess that's what my real question is how come we're asking for $516,000 in savings to be moved out of it, but then next year we're asking for $1.6 million more?
So we have a savings in the current year. So we're taking those savings to use them to fill other needs in the current fiscal year. The additional increase in FY20 is net of the savings we currently have based on the subscriber mix, plus the 3% increase that's expected for healthcare inflation for FY20. So this savings appears in FY19. Those savings are being reallocated to a space where we can use them in 19 as opposed to letting them fall into the fund balance.
So if you're saying that we could have had a 2.1% increase in the health savings.
That's correct. If we had If this savings had not occurred in 19, we hadn't had the change in the subscriber mix, the increase in 20 would have been greater.
Okay.
I mean, our Board of Ed's contribution into the employee health care fund is in excess of $40 million.
Yeah, it's $40 million. And you said at 2%. 2% is about $1 million, and we're asking for 1.6, but we received a $500,000 savings.
It's a
I guess
3% increase next year.
Okay.
Sorry if I misspoke.
So yeah, so that's $1.2 million increase, and you're asking for 1.6, but we had a $500,000 savings. I guess I have a difficulty transferring or asking for a $500,000 savings being transferred, or the next year you're asking for more than the 3% increase, and you realize the savings. And I want to say thank you for the savings, which I know that's, like you said, employee-wise transfers and things like that, but that's a difficulty for me.
Next year's increase is also driven partly by new positions. We had the new pre-K
60 new
positions.
full-time positions.
Yes, so that's part of the increase. It's not just the 3%. We also have to increase the line item for the board's share of the premiums, estimated premiums on all those new positions. So
Yes.
That's what's driving that. And we also have, when you look at the 3-page summary, on the second or third page of that, there is a savings to health insurance built in. It's just that on the first page, when we have the summary of increases, there's the 3% increase, and then mixed in different places, there is the increase in the health insurance due to new positions.
So I guess I'd like to see that breakdown.
Okay, we can do that.
We'll provide that to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions by the commissioners?
I just have a question on your, and this is just for my information. Other instructional cost on the adjust the CTE maintenance of effort amount. You have 110,000 there. I guess I just explain that a little bit. Actually, what that is.
So what we have to spend in order to get the Perkins grant that we get every year from federal purposes. We have to maintain what's called a CTE maintenance of effort, and so we have to spend at least as much in the current year as we have in the prior year, and that's an adjustment to last year we bought some things for the new business labs,
The Innovation Center.
Innovation Center. So this is an adjustment to bring that spending up to what, because not enough was budgeted, so we're bringing that up to spend and reflect the maintenance of effort requirement.
Many of our programs have a maintenance of effort just the same way that county commissioners have a maintenance of effort for overall Board of Education funding. Inside the larger budget, programs like CTE and special education have additional MOE requirements that are very similar in terms of allocation per student based on the previous year expenses.
Commissioners, any other questions?
I mean, I guess it goes back to court. Are you going to support the motion without the information that you've requested?
I would support the motion for the 474,660, which is basically everything except for the savings, and I would like that information that we could go back again for that 516.
Is that a motion in that form?
I make that motion.
I have a motion with court's inquiry. Is there a second to that?
I know it's our decision, not yours. Is that feasible?
Could I?
Well,
could
just get a second before we have discussion. I'm sorry to point of order. We have a motion, unless you'd want to withdraw your motion and go to open discussion. There's a second discussion.
Okay, as Mr. Prue indicated, the 516 is the savings that we are experiencing this year. It's not a cut to the program or anything. It's just reflecting what the board is obligated to pay based on the members who are participating this year. And then we, recognizing that we have savings this year, we have also budgeted savings next year, and that in those cuts that we have, the detail line by line cuts. And then we've also provided for, so we're addressing that in next year and this year's budget. We've also provided for the increase of the 3% and the new position. So this is a current year adjustment that we actually are going to realize no matter what happens. And next year's budget, we've accounted for that savings and what we believe will be that situation going forward.
Well, I understand that, and I guess that's why I'm asking for the information, because if you're saying it's a 3% and that's 1.2, and I understand the adding 60 employees, but I have a difficulty moving money from an area that's what we're going to be budgeted. Because if we come back next year and we say, hey, there's another $500,000 of savings, that could have been, that's money that it's getting just compounding onto our budget. And so before I can transfer the money out, or in my, they can agree, they can vote on it, but before I can agree to transfer the money out, I want to make sure that it's been put into the budget for next year for the savings.
We can certainly break out for you how much is in the budget next year for new positions versus the 3% increase, and also the savings that we're projecting based on this subscriber mix change. So we can certainly provide that.
And that's all that I'm asking.
And I think
to approve.
to the root ultimately of Commissioner Kiefer's question,
This is always on the budget.
the savings we're projecting in that line item are then in the top part of the form you have in front of you are spread across, they're not necessarily earmarked to a particular line in the bottom half of the document. So you've got savings here, expenses here. It may be better for us and cleaner from a documentation perspective to provide the commissioners the answer to the question you're seeking and to return for approval on the same exact document.
May I interrupt? Could I ask for the motion second be withdrawn? We table it till you bring back that information.
I can withdraw it, that's fine.
Would that be acceptable?
I was trying to get you some of the funding, some of the transfer. But if it's better for you to get it all at once, I'm fine with that.
Not imperative. We'll have the answer to you before
And
close
he
of
wants to
business.
Bring the information back. Let's bring it back next.
I think it's cleaner.
Would you like to withdraw your first and second?
I withdraw.
And then I would suggest someone make a motion to table this and you bring the complete information back. Motion to table.
Can I ask a question real quick? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, you've withdrawn the motion.
You've withdrawn the motion, so we're
consensus that it be placed on the next agenda. You don't need a formal motion.
consensus to place it on the next agenda. Okay. So we're out of the motion in second.
You can ask, but
Yeah, I have one question to make it brief. Just clear something up in my mind. You have in how many for new pre-K teachers?
20.
20, and there was 21
paraprofessionals.
What happens if we can't field enough of pre-K to use these teachers? What happens to that money?
I think the board and the superintendent will have to have discussions about what are their priorities. It's potential, if the Board of Ed's proposed budget is not fully funded, they'll have to decide where are they going to reap the savings.
No, I think my question is, I'm not convinced not that we don't need it. Maybe I support pre-K, but I'm not convinced
I understand the question now.
You can field that many.
I think what Dr. Michael said last week is initially we'll post the teaching position. So the state of Maryland's requirement is 10 students to 1 staff member in a pre-K program. So we will initially open with funding the classroom teachers and hold the paraprofessionals. So our programs are currently 20 to 1, 20 to 2. So we'll post the teachers first, fill programs to 10. When we know we can move to 20 in a particular location, then we'll hire the paraprofessional and fill that classroom to 20. So we can do it incrementally while still filling programs in all schools all across the county.
Thank you.
All right, is there a consensus to table to next week?
It would be 2 weeks.
Okay. All right. Gentlemen, thank you for your patience and your waiting on.
Not a problem.
delay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners are in agreement. Let's go back to citizens' participation. I think we were in the third row last time. Anybody in the third row? Seeing none, fourth row? Seeing none, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. Fifth row? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Good morning.
Morning.
Commissioners, Mr. Slocum and your staff. Good morning and thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name is Mark Hopp and I reside at 18042 Knoll Drive in Fairplay. Gentlemen, I come before you this morning in a plea for help and in full support of the Fire and Emergency Services for Washington County. I'm 47 years old, married and a father of 3 teenage children, and a taxpayer of Washington County. I'm a 25-year veteran of the Montgomery County Police Department, and I've been involved in emergency services since I was 13 years old. I started my volunteer service near Buffalo, New York, and although I am a volunteer with 2 local volunteer fire companies, I am speaking as a tax-paying constituent, and my words and opinions are my own and do not reflect that of the views and opinions of those companies for which I belong. I've seen emergency services change dramatically in 34 years, some for the good, some for the not so good. The one thing that has been consistent throughout the years is the rising cost of doing business, of providing fire and emergency services, and the everyday demand for the people to do the job, as the rank and file of the operational volunteers seems to decline yearly. This is occurring nationally and is not something unique to Washington County. What is unique to Washington County is the out-of-box thinking of our dedicated fundraising members that come up with to help raise funds to keep our heads above water. Unfortunately, the wells are drying up, and without sustainable revenue source, the situation will continue to deteriorate. Please don't get me wrong. Both the current seated and past Board of County Commissioners should be applauded for not raising taxes in over 18 years. But unfortunately, that means that the other services, especially fire and EMS, suffer, and it puts those services 18 years behind the curve of operating on a similar funding mechanisms that were used in 2001. To make matters worse, fire and EMS companies in this county are receiving only 15 to 18% return on their yearly fund drive from the community that they serve. Yet 100% of the community reaps the benefits when they call 911 for an emergency. This is not right, nor is it fair to the 15 to 18% that are donating to support these companies. The volunteer companies are dependent upon the contributions to help and continue their free service, whether it's a lack of education on the subject matter, citizens relocating to the area from the areas where taxes supported a career system, or the fact that we need a change in times. The bottom line is the system is broken and it needs help now. It seems that everyone is afraid to address the obvious elephant in the room, and God forbid you mention the word of a fire tax or fee, as some are afraid of being chastised or not reelected. But as the authority having jurisdiction, public safety should be your number one concern, especially in the world of fire and EMS. Contrary to the poorly used words of the association president, things are not okay on the EMS side. The providers in this county are underpaid and burned out. As the system robs Peter to pay Paul in order to ensure that the shifts are covered, it's all just smoke and mirrors. If you don't believe me, just ask the boots that hit the streets every day as EMS providers, and I'm sure that they will give you a different opinion about the EMS system as it is, and it is not okay right now. Sadly, even a blind man could have seen through the BS that was stated the week the association president, which totally contraindicates the Division of Emergency Services and the 26 volunteer fire and EMS organizations that are fighting for a united front, which is help. I hate to pay taxes like everyone else, but if it guarantees that I'll have a fire engine at my door or a well-trained paramedic for my family's medical emergency, then the best insurance policy that I could pay is to have my taxes raised. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, and I look forward to moving forward with EMS.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Before next citizens' participation, just remember, we're trying to keep your comments to 3 to 5 minutes, not to limit your opinion, but to move the process along. Anyone else in the back row or in the gallery who would like to participate, please come forward, state your name and address, please.
Hello, Roger Otzelberger. I'm Chief of Potomac Valley Fire Department, and I live at 2064 Huffmaster Road. So I'll be brief, and I'm on the same lines as everybody else that's been speaking for fire and rescue. We 100% need a tax fee or some funding revenue. I'm going to give you a quick screenshot of the finances of Potomac Valley, just so you realize how bad we really are. We receive of taxpayer dollars $45,000 as a county allotment and another $25,000 subsidy towards staffing. We currently are spending $54,000 just on wages alone for the staff that we provide. We attempt to provide 7 days a week, 12 hours a day coverage. Then we also pay another $6,000 for workers' comp. The scary part of it is we've never had a claim on our workers' comp. If we were to get 1 or 2 claims of what that would do to our workers' comp insurance, we could not cover any additional cost in workers' comp, which would mean we would have to eliminate the career staffing that we currently have, which would totally leave us unprotected. You know, who knows how many days out of the year because you can't quantify it unless we physically have a call that day. So the rest of the money, we have an operating budget of about $130,000 a year. We do, the county does provide repair maintenance reimbursement, but that's only for a frontline piece. We spent $27,000 of our own money on top of the reimbursement last year for the rest of our fleet because we have support vehicles and other vehicles that are not considered frontline but are required for our service. We run boats and we have a lot of towpath calls. So long story short, we can only bank about $10,000 a year after all of our expenses. The talks last week, removing the reserve fleet, using it to possibly fund staffing or adding into to help fund with the SAFER grant, is the robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're not going to be in a position that we can replace our engine. You know, an engine's $500,000, $600,000 now. Our newest piece that we have is a 2007. Putting $10,000 back every year towards that, it's just not going to work out. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Just to let everyone know who's here waiting on the emergency service overview, after the last person speaks at citizens participation, and I'd like to go directly to that report. Director Hayes, is there anyone else in the back row or gallery who would like to participate in citizens participation? Please come forward. Seeing none, Director Hayes, would you come forward with your report, please? Emergency services overview, and we'll backtrack to cover the other items best as possible. Please introduce yourself, and we know where you are.
David Hayes, Director of Emergency Services, 1222 South Point Drive, Hagerstown, Maryland.
Excuse me, Kingsley Poole, Chair of the Emergency Services Advisory Council, 14008 Weaver Avenue, Morgansville.
Bob Moncrief, President, Washington County Fire and Rescue, 7509 University Road, Boonesboro.
Gentlemen, we're here again to follow through with last week's direction from the commissioners to bring options for consideration and look at fire and EMS equally and try to create a staged or phased-in approach over the next several years. The report in brief, due to current budget shortfalls and the associated challenges, the Division of Emergency Services and the Washington County Volunteer Fire and Rescue Association, the direction of the Board of County Commissioners, to develop a phased approach to county firefighter and EMS staffing. Staff continues to evaluate options for consideration and moving forward with implementation of Phase 2 of the Strategic Firefighter Staffing Plan and Phase 2 of the EMS Master Plan. In doing so, the $800,000 in the CIP apparatus reserve fleet for FY20 and future years has been included in preparing options for consideration by the board. Discussion, the board has directed staff to prepare multiple options that include the utilization of the $800,000 CIP funding included in the upcoming apparatus reserve fleet for FY20 and future years. The options outlined in the spreadsheet listed below utilize an assumptive split in funding between fire and EMS. The reference spreadsheet options include firefighters that would be hired under a SAFER grant application and range in total from 4 to 32. The spreadsheets utilize escalating increments of 4 firefighters for under each option. EMS options are more difficult to determine and would benefit from an approach that designates funding in the amount of $450,000 to be utilized for EMS staffing assistance. In determining the most effective application of these funds, the Division of Emergency Services will meet with the 8 volunteer EMS companies. This meeting will seek input into the various options for consideration and approval by the board at a later date and time. As there are no connection to the application period for a SAFER grant under EMS, timing is not critical for these discussions. I would emphasize not as critical. As additional taxpayer dollars are forwarded to the volunteer fire and EMS departments through staffing and other programs, consideration should also be given that includes funding and implementation of a third-party financial firm. The firm will be responsible to monitor, verify, and subsequently initiate payment processes that would occur for reimbursement of expenses of authorized use of taxpayer dollars. The authorized uses are listed within the emergency services fiscal policy under the Office of Budget and Finance. Savings that have been brought forth through the Volunteer Fire and Rescue Insurance Program could fund the cost of the financial monitoring and reimbursement processes. The recurring cost of implementing this new process is expected to be $95,900. In consideration of the budget shortfall and subsequent challenges presented in the same, strategies have been taken that work and structure options that work towards a phased approach over a defined period. Fiscal impact, year one, stage one, up to $800,000. That is the CIP apparatus reserve fleet funding. And then the fiscal review and accountability for $95,900. Year two, stage two, we recommend consideration of implementing revenue increases to meet the escalating costs in stages 3 through 5. Year three, stage three, would require an additional $561,471.84 and an additional $500,000 for EMS. Year four, stage four, would require an additional $491,287.90, which represents the end of the SAFER grant if awarded, and an additional $500,000 for EMS. Year five, stage five, would involve application of a second SAFER grant at an expected cost of $450,220.40 and an additional $750,000 for EMS. And concurrences are not applicable, and the alternatives are to continue with the current funding and staffing levels, and you have your attachments. And what I would reference in the EMS sides of each of these numbers, that still goes down a road or at least a path where we look to bring staff over and start to merge them into county employees. But again, how that would happen and what departments would come first, what departments would come last, we feel is best represented, or at least through discussion with the 8 EMS companies and hopefully reaching some kind of consensus. And then the additional year's EMS funding, basically in year three, would attempt to bring 1 to 2 more departments, the same in year four, and in year five is enough money to bring the remaining departments over. So in 5 years, we would potentially move through the merging of the providers as county employees.
Dave, can you clarify something for me real quick?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to keep going back to the SAFER grant. You can be, we need drivers. Would you agree or disagree? We need drivers, correct?
Firefighters who are also drivers.
Firefighters, but a driver slash is usually firefighter, but a firefighter slash is usually not a driver. Is that a correct statement?
It can be possible, yes.
So the SAFER grant doesn't allow just for drivers, but you'd have to hire firefighters and then train them to be drivers. Is that correct?
That could be a scenario. We would expect to hire firefighters that meet the driver
That already are
application.
qualified to drive.
Yeah, and in most of these cases, this would require, because we don't have a training academy, to
Right.
hire people that have no training and bring them up. This requires an assumption that we can hire whatever number we move forward, train.
So it's doable if we move to the SAFER grant. It's doable that we can fulfill that need.
Yes, we believe so.
Yeah.
Now, what we did make sure that we had accurate information on was a question that Commissioner Meinl-Smith had asked last week, is if we were to go after 32 or 60 or 5,
Right.
and for a hiring reason, meaning that you were not out there and available, if we could not fulfill that number of hires, we would not lose the grant. We would only forfeit the number of firefighters
Gotcha.
that we couldn't hire.
Now, one more, and I'll let someone else. You guys can move on. The 800,000 in the fleet reserve is. How often do we get into that over the past years?
It's a new program that was funded just over 2 years ago. So we currently have $800,000 that has landed in that account, and then
Right.
we're scheduled to fund the subsequent years of $800,000 from 2020 and on.
I
So
got
we
you.
haven't purchased anything out of that.
So
We're
it's never
prepared.
been used yet, but it's only been in there 2 years, is
Yeah,
that
the
correct?
intent was to buy 3 engines and 3 ambulances.
I got you.
That would come to land, but again, we've just decided with the budget challenges,
With the budget challenges, what do we need, apparatus or staffing?
staffing. I think you heard that loud and clear here earlier.
Talking about the reserve fleet real quick. I've talked to lots of different people. I think everyone has this, and everyone's been contacting us and giving input, and I want to thank you for that because this is a huge topic, and we need as much information as what Commissioner Key was saying earlier is, I mean, I was a rescue swimmer, and I just hopped on the helicopter and jumped out, and it was an EMT. I didn't have to deal with scheduling or budgeting anything. It was the Navy, and so you knew it was going to get paid and you were staffed. But I needed all this input from everybody. But one of the things that I did hear is that we've got more than enough equipment countywide. Now, in some facilities that we have too much equipment. And so one of my things with this reserve fleet is how can we make sure that we have the proper amount of equipment? And I'm thinking countywide, not just, one company, but countywide, that we have the proper amount of equipment and have a reserve fleet that we can utilize. And is there a way that we can utilize what we already have countywide? I understand that each company owns their equipment and there's, difficulties there, but as we've seen, everyone's wanting, this is a countywide problem. It's not a company A problem. So I think that's something that we need to be looking at, because we also heard earlier, we don't want to take out a reserve fleet because we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but this is something that we need to look at is countywide, do we have the proper equipment? So if a engine 1 goes down, company C can say, hey, I can help you out until we can get this fixed up.
And there is some of that goes on even today, where companies are good neighbors. I don't know that any company, at least nothing that I am aware of, has ever denied the use of a piece of apparatus. The question gets is if something significant happens to it, who covers that cost? So there's where the palatability of a reserve fleet that's owned by the county becomes a little bit more flexible. And at some point, we'll need some of the use of, at least in part, apparatus at the training center once it's built and functioning. So part of this is a longer-term vision to provide some county assets that can help there, where we don't necessarily need the volunteers to bring that apparatus during the daytime for a training class. But where your conversation is kind of a thought that I already have, only because we're in a position to have to move away from a program the way it was originally designed. We're going to have to think outside the box again and say, okay, how can we still meet this need, or at least get a distance down that road to have some type of usable apparatus that can be shared.
I guess my next question going with that is, with this reserve fleet, is there a way to reduce the amount by saying that the county could purchase a piece of equipment that a company already owns that they may or may not need? That's an additional thing, so that we're buying at the county at a lower fee because it's a used piece of equipment, but it's still operational, that facility doesn't need, that we could use in that reserve fleet. Is that a possibility?
It certainly is a possibility. It does not come without its challenges. So what I would add to that conversation is each fire station is not built the same, meaning the hole that the fire truck goes into is not necessarily as square or as deep as it might be. So if we buy varying pieces of apparatuses, we would likely not be able to, in a used market, buy identical pieces. One of the advantages of a new piece is, first, it's a 20-year investment, so that's about the life expectancy we look at them. But from a usability standpoint, the only thing that changes with that piece of apparatus is the VIN number. It would look, feel, drive, and behave exactly the same. So again, the preferred way, in my opinion, is new, because we can build it exactly and it fits in the smallest hole. So regardless of which piece is available, it always fits. We don't have to run them around trying to figure that out. But secondly, in a world, and again, you've heard from a lot of those folks behind us that put hours in, if you have a driver that maybe isn't driving routinely, but they have driven, and this time they get the other piece that they really haven't had much time on it, the handling of that vehicle is going to be somewhat different. Its performance is going to be different. So from a risk management standpoint, for my comfortability, I would still prefer to be in a position for like equipment, meaning it's identical. But again, understanding where we are, we have to manage programs within our budgets.
Dave, I have a question on our ARF form, under discussion, the second paragraph, the SAFER grant solves the fire side of the equation, but not the EMS side.
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned a possibility of providing additional funding in the amount of $450,000. How would that be distributed between the companies?
So that's the challenge that I was referring to when we talked about seeking input from the 8 companies after this meeting. If we're given direction that that's the dollar amount we're generically going to look at for EMS, we certainly have our opinions in the best way to move that, but there's several assumptions in some of the scenarios that we would have presented that take into consideration of how much net billing that the county would need to make those scenarios work. And without having time to vet those, I just felt we were in a better position to look at that generically at this juncture. And again, it's not tied into that March 22nd deadline. I'm not saying that we're not at a crisis, and I'm not saying that timing doesn't matter, but we do have a little bit of time where we can work with the individual companies and again, hopefully come back here and say, this is how we feel it should go and not be in an opposing format. And I can't tell you today that they would buy into what my opinions or our office's opinions may or may not be.
Can I follow up on your question? So on the EMS, from the initial discussion we had last week, is that they came back and say the 8 companies wanted all the 100% of the employees. Am I correct by that?
Yes.
So if that happened and we took over all 8 stations, then who owns the equipment, the facilities?
The volunteer stations still maintain all of those.
So the volunteer stations are going to maintain the equipment and the facilities, and we're just going to be staffing them.
Yeah, the way we're looking at it, Commissioner, is we're merging the staffing portion of it, the career staffing. The volunteer groups would still own their volunteer staffing, obviously, and then all of the the corporation-owned assets, which in all cases are the facility and the apparatus.
Okay.
And I think that'll be a question for our insurance for risk management, how that's a cohesive mix. Would you not say that's?
We do that currently on the fire sides, even though it's not full-time staffing. We already have this dynamic in play. So this is not that the actual introduction of county staffing in the volunteer stations is not should not produce.
If I could follow up then on that question. The 106 EMS staff members that we have across our 8 companies, some of them are full-time employees at one company and part-time at another company or 2.
Absolutely.
So they work more, they're working overtime hours, but because they're working for individual companies, there's no overtime pay factored into it. How would we go about calculating, can we absorb that cost? I mean, would we be reducing hours? Would we be reducing actual bodies that we have in our station to help out?
So what we would encumber is a twofold impact there. The first one would be potentially to the employee, where they may have a financial setback that, and I've made it clear in every meeting, even prior to the votes that came to bring this motion here to you, that we can't unwind to 2 income earners. We just can't do it. There's no way that we can pay it in a county staff or salary what some of these folks may be making if they're working the equivalent of 1.5 jobs or even in some cases maybe 2. The second impact becomes as we lose that person, there's one person filling 2 spots in 2 different stations, if you will. So let's use a scenario, somebody's working 2 full-time jobs, company A and company B. That person is really taking the place of 2 people. The overtime, the things that you're talking about are not in play, obviously because they're 2 separate employers, but the challenge, the staffing challenge is still there for us. So when we talk about needing 90, 100, 110 employees, there may only be 70 or 75 of them working in the county. We'll have to go out just like with the fire side and actually hire and recruit additional bodies into that system as a whole. But let me give you the negative side of that same impact. So that single provider is working 2 jobs in the county and they have an injury or a medical illness, we've lost the equivalent of 2 positions at the same time. So there's also the reciprocal impact where there's a positive potentially, there's a negative as well.
You gonna say something, Terry? Go ahead. I already spoke once. Go for it.
I've been consumed by this all week since last Tuesday, and I've really been working my brain, talking to people. I think the commissioners, our EMS community, our fire community, we're in a position here right now. As everyone said, we're at a crossroads, but we're also in a commission or a position where we have the opportunity to be a model of the state, model of the country. And I think it's going to take some creative thinking, creative minds. I know I had a thought that came to me yesterday, just throughout discussions. I can't disclose it yet, but I went to our county administrator and I talked to him. And he said, Terry, that's a clever idea, but it may take some legislative action and so forth. But anyhow, so we are discussing, I think every county commissioner's talking to somebody about ideas and thoughts. And I'm hopeful, after I make my comments here, I may say something that comes out wrong. I hope you don't kick me for it, because I think I want exactly what everybody else wants here. I want the best possible fire and rescue that we can have in Washington County. So please don't take my words and try to make something out of them that I really don't mean, because that's, when you're speaking in front of a group, it's easy for something to come out wrong.
You're saying you're making room for a retraction.
There you go, buddy. So please, I'm just, I want to move this forward. And I think, I remember when we hired Mr. Slocum, I've been with him, I've been talking to him for day one. How can we shore up our EMS and volunteer fire companies? We've talked about different scenarios and so forth. I've talked about individuals out in the community that have their heart and soul in fire and rescue. And they've talked about how to shore up the EMS. If we can shore up the EMS, that helps reduce some of the calls to the fire companies. So I really think we're at a crossroad. We are at a crossroads, and I think we have an opportunity to really, really do something special here. We heard a speaker talk about sustainable funding. There are conversations that we need to have. We don't want to be coming back in here in 3-4 years. We need $4 or $5 million, and we don't know where it's coming from. So me as a commissioner, I need to be able to have a plan to put in place so that I know that I'm going to have funding that's going to be sustainable once we move forward with everything here. We talked about the apparatus fund. I think we still have the ability to have an apparatus fund. We may be taking the apparatus fund money now, trying to get it in a position to where we relieve some of the concerns, and we should be doing that. I was really, really touched when you had $450,000 here for EMS. I've had discussion with our county administrator. I was told that if we could just get $50,000 to the EMS companies, and that was conversation 6 months ago. And I look in the ARF, I see $450,000. So that's a start. And so I would like, if we move forward, I want to come up with a plan where we hire the right number of people with the SAFER grant. I want to make sure it's right from day one. And I want to make sure the funding's in place. And I also would like to be able to somehow come up with an apparatus fund. So we could still put some money into an apparatus fund where the companies could come to us and say, hey, we need this piece of equipment. Is there any chance of a match? So, I mean, it would be pretty special for a company out there that needs $1 million piece of equipment, and we have the ability to share $50,000 or $50 million or $500 million with them if they come up with it. And I'm just throwing out,
Right.
I don't know if that's the scenario, but that would be something for a committee to work together on. And we had an individual here today talk about putting a committee together. I'm all for that. How that committee would be put together, I don't think we can wait. I think if we decide to put a committee together to get information back to the county commissioners so that we can make a decision, I don't think we put it off any longer than we have. I think if we don't move forward with the SAFER grant today, we should be ready to move forward with it in 6 months. And I know you can't apply until a certain date, but that information should be together, ready to move within a reasonable time frame before we get into our budget session. So that way we know exactly what we need, what we want. And I think you alluded to it last week here, Dave, that it's pressing. But if we had to put it off for a couple of months before we could move forward with the exact number that we needed, that we would be able to survive. And if the money that you're presenting here today is not enough of money, I think we could probably find, I don't know what our our general fund has, but if we would needed some emergency money to get us through until the next budget cycle, when you actually come in and say, hey, this is what we really, really need from the SAFER grant. I just want to make sure we do it right. Again, we have the opportunity to put some creative minds together as to how we can have a sustainable fund. I talked several times over the past year where a lot of the times a company will go out onto a call to a big industry many times throughout the year, but that company doesn't donate to the fire and rescue companies. There are discussions that should be happening. I think if you want to, you and I talked about the lean group, and remember we talked about that. So I think there's things that we have the ability to put in place, move forward, and let's come up with something that's going to be the envy and the model of the state. I don't want to be a county that I hear say Carroll County, Frederick County. You have issues with the volunteers and the paid people all of the time, or I don't want to say all of the time, but they have at times. We want to try to avoid all of that if possible. I just think we have the ability here, or the possibility of having something really special for the state of, or for the, for counties all over the country to emulate.
Understood.
May I?
Sure.
If we did this, what's the total cost first year, again, for review?
Which?
For fire and EMS combined?
Depends on the option.
Depends on which options listed.
I tell you, I could save you the time of forming a committee, and Washington County should begin a committee to have a fire tax. Because everything I hear today is we need sustainable income to support the essential services of Washington County. Public safety is not a Republican or a Democrat issue, it's a people's issue. So let's save some time in having a committee and start exploring the option of a fire tax with our delegation. There's our sustainability revenue. Thank you.
Oh.
You gonna say something? Oh, no, I just, one last thing to shore up for me, that's $800,000 we have in the fleet reserve. It sounded like Kevin and Ward from Smithburg said this thing was ready to collapse, and I've heard that a couple times today. Would 450,000 put a dent in it?
So 450 is only going to allow us to either do one of two or three options. One is to take that 450, divide that in some mathematical formula, disperse that in additional subsidies, which I think you heard from them is probably not going to provide a realistic impact to the sustainability of the system. I would concur with that. Or look at bringing, again, if we're going to go down a staged approach, year one of bringing one or two companies, nothing in year two, year three, again, bringing another group, year four, another group, and then year five, bringing the last group. To bring them all, again, taking some assumptions, and I want to answer Commissioner Klein's question at the same time, it would take about just short of $2 million. We've been able to narrow and cut that gap of about $500,000, but that really just basically sharpened the knife to how much net billing revenue we need to look at. But we think we've got some ideas there that gets us at least down to a $2 million mark.
With all our budget shortfalls this year, how are we going to project paying and keeping up with this if we don't have something else to sustain a revenue?
Yeah.
Where our requests and projections fall and we fail these people because we're going to say we don't have any money?
Well, you're going to see, President Klein, from Sarah's presentation how challenging this budget year is, and that is certainly a concern among the staff level about sustainability. So without any additional revenue, so that is certainly a concern. We were, and I want to give kudos to Dave and his staff, and Sarah's been working on this since last week, long and hard, because we were asked to come back with some various options because of the SAFER grant deadline, which is March 22nd. Commissioner Meinl-Schmidt aptly pointed out that we don't want to get to the last minute of that same week and then try to make a decision that week. So there are options here in front of us, or in front of you, for the numbers that can be presented. I just want to go back to one question that keeps hitting me from various levels is, Dave, can you tell us how, if emergency service and fire both today, they do in phase one, and let's go back to both studies because this has been a studied issue. This is not new and different. Under both studies, they said there's a phase one and a phase two. We're on the cusp of phase two. That's what we're talking about here. Phase one took and put emergency services in 2 stations and in EMS, and it also provided 8 full-time firefighters. And they were then dispatched out as needed for scheduling. And I just have to ask the question again, can that, expanding that model, can that work to best satisfy and serve the parties as we go through this? Because it seems as though 100%, from 0 to 100%, is not going to be necessarily the operation immediately.
Right.
So it's a staged approach, as was talked about last week. Can you take and put services to assist similar to the model you have now, but expanded to get through a certain amount of time?
So let me split that conversation, if I can, at least in the beginning here, between fire and EMS. So the 8 firefighters were hired, and they took the place of the part-time hours that were being expended for our special operations station. So there's a station there that is the county's primary responsibility for technical rescue, hazardous material responses, swift water rescue, all of those things that are high caliber, high intensity, high priority calls. Not that all calls can't be that, but those are highly specialized calls. So we have 2 people that work there every day of the week. That takes 8 people to fulfill that. So they're not traveling through the county. They're only working over on Frederick Street. The 23 people that used to do that job on a part-time basis still work for us. That's the group that is plugging and playing throughout the county's, technically 15 stations, but they're only working at about 9 of them right now that are using those. So that's the fire side of that 8 people full-time positions. The other 8 paramedics, they both actually, believe it or not, work in fire stations in chase cars, ALS chase cars, and provide advanced ALS skills. So they carry ventilators, they're able to do rapid sequence intubation, and that might not mean a lot to the normal person, probably does to court, but that's where we have a patient that is in extreme emergent condition and the respiratory drive needs to be controlled. We can actually paralyze that respiratory effort and actually ventilate for them, and they carry the machine that gives the mechanical ventilation for that rather than somebody there counting to 5 and doing their own bag. But that's not a program that is can be realistically expanded to every paramedic in the county and deployed throughout the county. Hence the reason for those hybrid ALS chase vehicles. So to take them and pull them out of that role would create a whole nother effect to the system. And then likewise, we run a BLS and a paramedic on an ambulance, but on those high acuity calls where you've got somebody, say, in cardiac arrest, it is without question beneficial to have that second paramedic there, second set of ALS hands to get those life-saving skills accomplished in the most efficient and effective and expedient manner. So we would take that away as well if we use them as the base level thing as well. And I can speak from past experience, and actually their assistant chief is sitting behind us in the back row. Community Rescue Service, where I came from, since 1998 has delivered that same level of service above and beyond their primary ALS units, because there's a need to get that second paramedic there and some type of oversight of the incident. We call it supervision. Some days we don't, but the bottom line is we need a set of eyes that are looking over the event as a whole. So I don't know if I went there, but I don't think that's going to provide a real qualitative result to this, because it's just too few across too big of an expanse. 8 stations, if you even looked at trying to staff that, just to give you the real quick numbers, would take 32 paramedics. We have 8. So we would only be into that less than 25% impact to that globally. So I don't know if I answered that well enough or not.
That helps, thank you.
I got a quick question here. because I do think we have to look at this sooner than later. I don't want to punt this. We do have to look at funding down the road, because as we know with the SAFER grant, year 4, it's 100% on us. We have to make sure that we've got that and then can make up, it sounds like, make up some of this money on the $800,000. But option 1, you guys have 4 firefighters. To me, and everything that I've heard over the last week and prior, 4 firefighters is going to do absolutely nothing. It's not even a realistic option.
Yep.
Okay.
I would encourage you to do nothing with firefighters themselves and offer that $306,000 to the stations.
Exactly. That to me didn't make any sense. So what is this? Where is the first number that we're actually doing something for the firefighters?
So
is it 16? Is it 20? That we're actually saying now we're benefiting the fire department. It's going to actually do a positive impact. So we can say, okay, where's that number?
So the fiscal synopsis that you have in the ARF and then the attachment that gives you year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that fiscal synopsis takes into consideration, you would select, get my eyes on my own options here, the 16 firefighter option, which is actually 18 firefighters, because we, in that particular scenario, we present 16 boots on the ground in the volunteer stations. We present a battalion chief, 1 dayside battalion chief, to help us manage that workflow and workforce out in the field. And then we also, because we're going to go after the SAFER grant, recommending exercising 1 full-time dayside firefighter for the airport to help with that staffing scenario out there. So total bodies, it would be 18.
Keep in mind that phase 1 snuck up on us really, really quick.
Correct.
I wouldn't want phase 2 to come back and then say, okay, now we got to.
Yeah, I think it just goes down to the conversations you heard earlier of the importance and criticality of coming up with some type of sustainable revenue for this. You should not assume that we do something and for the next 5 years there are going to be no other needs of the service. I think that would be a terrible mistake to assume that the decision we make today carries us for 5 years with no additional cost here.
Now, the next question is in here. You're returning the firefighter subsidy based upon the amount. Is that
Yes.
what's in blue?
So each station gets $25,000 today. So whatever number you choose, if it's 16, that's 4 stations. We would pull back each of those stations $25,000 staffing subsidy in return for a 24-hour staff member in their station. But we'd only affect 4 stations.
Exactly.
To give you the I think probably to bring us to the other part of your question, there were 12 stations that asked for help currently out of the 15. 3 at this point don't need it. They support it. They support phase 2 and approval moving forward with phase 2, but right now they think they're doing okay. But that doesn't mean, to Commissioner Wagner's comment, next year they come in and say, hey, we lost 3, 4, 5 dedicated volunteers and we're just not getting it done right now.
So right now you think option 4 would work?
So our recommendation would go back, if you really want the answer to that,
Yeah, I do.
is back to what we believe we can hire is 32. But we understand the money is not there for that. So based on the available money in a 50-50 split, taking $450,000 for EMS and making sure we have something reserved for discussions.
Will work's a bad way to put it. Adequate. Adequate's the word I want.
60's adequate.
60's adequate.
And honestly, if you're asking me to be truthful with that,
right,
that answer's still no, because we're 20% driver only, we're 40% understaffed. 1 firefighter in 1 station at one time will make an effect to that, but it is not going to eliminate that.
So you're thinking option 6 or 7 is still a little bit of a Band-Aid? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because it takes years to get through this process.
Gotcha.
So that you couldn't say it's not even really a Band-Aid. It's just hoping the other bleeds don't bleed out before we can get to them.
So and I'm going to be persecuted for this, but I'm going to ask the question. So you're saying that we're putting, for this 1 firefighter for the station that need it all day. So that's 3 firefighters per station, but I know there's a multiplier because of time off and all of that. And that's what we're looking at. And the next question is, what happens if we, instead of putting 1 all around where we could have a driver only or maybe a driver and 1, and from all the conversations that we've had is the magic number is 4 people on a truck. Three's good, but the magic number's four. Am I?
That's a national measurement that
Okay,
most
so
would be
I'm
measured
correct.
to.
So what we're trying to do is make sure we always have one, and all the ones that need help. So not the staffing, the volunteers that currently have it. So, and now I'm just going to ask so I can get better understanding. I know we've talked about this, but what happens instead of just doing one in these different, we fully staffed, 3 in strategically located fire departments, so that I know that if a fire truck goes out, we could have a fully staffed fire truck to location. It might not be the first truck there, but when it gets there, it's fully staffed, and we're a better response for the community in whole.
That certainly is a way we can look at that, what we have heard historically. And again, we did have that conversation about whether it's called a regional staffing model, whether that was something we should bring forward here. And this was now several months ago in these discussions. And the chiefs were more concerned that they didn't have something coming out from their community to at least get the first piece of apparatus there. And some of these calls that they're failing on, it's not all of them, and it certainly isn't the lion's share of them, are medic assist calls. One of the reasons we run a fire department on those particular types of calls is because they're significantly closer than the ambulance that would be coming. So in that model, there's a challenge there that creeps into that equation, where if that fire department doesn't get out, the next company is maybe the EMS company that's coming, that was supposed to be coming, but it's coming from a longer distance. So we potentially affect the system in that way. And back, if you go back to the resolution of 2014, that group of commissioners looked at it as we want to assure that at a minimum, out of every station, we get a piece of apparatus out, hopefully 100% of the time, but
So
95 is the benchmark.
If you took a poll right now on the idea of rapid response of everybody, would 20% agree with it, or would 80% agree with that concept?
20.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's just, they're looking out in that area, nobody wants their company to not get out on that call. I get it, that's what we do this for, because we care about the community.
In that same vein, taking what you said, Commissioner Wagner, and what you said, Dave, is I think where your 60 number is coming from is anything short of 60. And I know 60 is an almost incredibly large number. I'm not saying it's necessarily realistic or viable. I'm just trying to piece together information. I think why you're saying anything less than 60 is you're meaning that one company, if you're trying to get that one piece out, that
Right.
anything less than 60, you're less than a company is coming up short. Is that?
That is exactly right. And I just want to go back to, Rob, I think, probably summed it up as well as anybody in one of our meetings, is 60 firefighters. You could think that we have a lot of firefighters working any given day. That's not the case. Exactly. That's one firefighter at one time in one station. Gotcha. So the good news is you can clearly see we're not trying to drive volunteers away. We're absolutely trying to augment the work that they're already doing and ensure that they've got a driver. There are times where they may have firefighters but may not have somebody that can drive. So again, that truck doesn't leave, we don't get the benefit of that. So there's just a whole multitude of things there. For me, it's the base part of the system. We start with the driver operator, make sure we've gotten that one conquered. And then we go into the additional, if you read phase 3, 4, 5 of the firefighter side of that, that's exactly what it starts to build. It doesn't put 3 firefighters in every station, at least with a career component. Now, you heard me say last week, and I'm going to stop and let the gentleman to my right speak, that this is one leg of at least a 3-legged stool. The volunteer incentives is another integral part of this. We haven't touched that. We've taken every piece of funding, trying to drive it in a cash-strapped budget to a career firefighting staffing solution that we have overwhelmingly been asked to consider and provide. And those votes were all unanimous. We sent the surveys out. 18 out of 21 possible departments have already told us what they need. So I'll leave it with that.
No, Dave, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions if you're done if Randy's done.
Sure, Commissioner.
Okay, on the, and I guess I'm just going to ask EMS billing. So the county will be taking over the EMS billing?
So these are decisions yet to be made by this board, obviously, but this is conceptually the ideal that we'd be looking at. And not necessarily we're taking over it. We agree to try to provide a contract. So one of these scenarios has a single source billing contract. It may be third party. some of the departments in the county already do that. Maybe they become the biller for the county. So there's some variables there, Commissioner, that we haven't had a chance to discuss with the 8 companies, and hence one of the reasons you don't see a more defined scenario here in your package right now. But we certainly have ideas about how that should look, but again, trying to get the
But
buy-in.
whatever we would decide to do, we're not going to affect a revenue source for the companies that rely on that billing.
No, and the first numbers we started working with were 80% net revenue
Yeah,
come to
'cause
the
that's-
county,
yeah.
leaving 20. The new numbers we're working with now, when I told you we got that delta down to about 1.99 million, takes in the 90% of that revenue. So again, I don't want to cause a shock anybody sitting in the
And I'm
audience.
just asking, so if you would take 90% of that revenue, the companies, how are you going to deal with the companies that rely on that revenue? So you'll
Well,
be
that's the conversation I'm speaking to. We've got to have with them yet. We need to do an analytical.
So they're going to get to keep what, I won't say keep, but they're going to get to present to you, this is what we need out of that billing to be able to be functional at
We would have
our
to meet
level.
with each of the 8 companies saying, okay, here's a 10% picture. This 10% plus the 48,000 plus the gaming money plus the Center Amos money, the fact that you get reimbursement for fuel maintenance and utilities, can you exist on that 10% net billing with everything else? So
But you're going to be willing to work with each individual company as to what that company's needs are going to be out of that billing
we'll have
money.
to. We can't create insolvencies.
Okay.
Fix an issue here and create insolvencies
Yeah,
on the
that
other
was a
side of
question I
that.
had. The other
Sarah would
thing
kill
is,
me.
the other question was, somewhere in there you had $95,000 for, is that an accountant or something?
That's a fiscal review relevant to each of the 26 companies. It's one of the conversations we've had, the administrator and I, along with the CFO, have talked about being able to ensure the taxpayer that when we look them in the eye, we can ensure them, at least for the taxpayer dollar, that it was spent on authorized purchases according to the fiscal policy for emergency services. And that policy's been in place, I would say 15 to 20 years. Sarah might even know that, but it's been there for a while. And that's just dealing with the 48,000, the gaming money, the Center Amos money. Center Amos is already reviewed at that level, but it's a third party because it's not something that we feel we can provide directly from our offices or Sarah's office. So we feel it's best done by a third party that would come and produce basically an authorization for payment.
So that's nothing that the association currently does with the companies? I thought the association,
They currently provide us a financial statement, which comes to the county, which comes to Sarah. But we're not sure that they're all doing it properly, and we're not sure that one company hasn't found
Right.
a golden egg here, that if we took that and spread the rest across the rest would be beneficial to us.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a way to put that $95,000 back into the companies. But that's something you can decide if there's something there that we can work with the organization or
Right.
not. So another question I had, so the companies that aren't asking for people, I think, and there are a couple of companies, they said they wanted to try to continue doing it on their own.
Three.
So how are we going to continue, how are we going to be able to help them also?
So we talked about that, and with having to use all of these funds for this particular staffing model to provide any real impact to them, there's just not the dollars and cents there to move something to that. Now, they obviously can request county staffing like the other 18 and would be included in that, but at this point, we don't have a plan moving forward that does anything different at that
I just don't
point.
think we should forget about those companies.
And certainly commissioners have all purview to charge some
Mhm.
direction that says,
Okay.
we want you to consider those 3 and come up with a dollar figure.
And then I know these numbers that you're providing, I see they're going out from 2020 to 2023. Do they
Yes.
have the annual pay raises factored into those numbers?
So they do not. They are on current dollars because it would be hard for us to put
I
that
understand.
number
I
there.
just, okay.
Yep, they do not.
Yeah. And then I had one last, so I had one last question. So once, if we decide to move forward with the SAFER grant today or when we're going to, I'm pretty sure, but I don't know if it's this year or next year. So if we were to move forward with the SAFER grant and then 3 years down the road, because I'm looking at these numbers, if we're going to have, I don't know, just look at staffing 12, it looks like we're going to need roughly $1 million to fund that fully in the fourth year out.
Right.
If we were going to have that money then, I guess that's money we should have had in place all along, I'm sure. But if we're going to have that money then, so what happens if a breakdown occurs between the volunteer companies and the paid staff, and then they decide, well, maybe we want to go back to paid staff. So in 4 years, we'll have the ability, if need, we may not have that ability or want to do it, but we can adjust those numbers of employees if need be after 4 years. So in other words, if say companies out there wanted to go back to the old way they're doing business, the county provide a subsidy, and it's equal to the amount that we're already providing to our paid staff, we could figure out a way to divide that up among the companies. We would have that discretion at that point in time.
You certainly would have the discretion. I would encourage you to steer away from that ideology in
Okay.
any capacity
Mhm.
because you're going to extremely limit the number and the attractability of this
Well,
program.
no, I understand, but I'm just saying if.
Yeah, the commissioners always have the purview to take us
Okay.
wherever they feel we need to be, but I would caution those conversations and thoughts of that direction.
Okay, that was just a question.
Yeah, Yep, fair enough.
Dave, I have a question. If I remember a year, maybe 2 years ago, there was talk that the SAFER grant might be in jeopardy at the federal level.
Yep.
And we were talking about maybe applying for it last year, and that didn't happen. My concern is I don't want to hire a small number with the expectation that we can apply again in 3 or 4 years. So I kind of see this as an opportunity to pursue now, I don't want to say go big or go home, but, get the biggest bang right now because that grant might be in jeopardy. It might not be available next year or in 3 years if we wanted to apply again. Maybe other communities, they're struggling with the same things we are. Maybe the grant, it wouldn't be awarded for a second time. So I'm looking at numbers between option 6 and 7, for example, and just looking at the cost 4 years out once the SAFER grant expires, we're just under about $300,000 in difference. We get to provide staffing to, if you break it out, 4 firefighters per company, 7 companies, I guess, instead of 6. Gets us more firefighters. That $300,000, that price 4 years out, that's a big number, but it's not that big for the additional coverage that we would get. And, personally, I've been looking through our budget, and I've found areas where we can more than make up today for that $300,000 if maybe we adjust some of the positions that we have vacant, that maybe we could apply that towards the firefighters. So I guess my question to you is, do you have the same concerns that a couple years down the road the SAFER grant might not be available? So if we don't take the opportunity now, is it likely to be available in the future?
I mean, we've heard those conversations, and I would hate to sit here and tell you that that possibility doesn't exist and it actually happened. But I also understand that some of these things are daunting even at the lower numbers, and the larger we get, I understand, and I guess the commissioners are taking the position that in years, without question, in years 3 and 4, and even next year, sustainability, that we're going to make the hard decisions to ensure that that funding is there as this grant starts to go away, and ultimately in 4 years when it is gone, we own whatever that number is. So we know there was conversations last year with President Trump, and at least for the years on the street that we got, conversation that it may not come through. We were happy last year to see it come through, and we're happy again this year to see it come through. And I would hope that the president will continue this program, because just in discussions like we're having, it makes a world of difference when you're faced with these monumental financial decisions, and tries to give you a chance to bring these on in a greater capacity up front, but understand you got to work to a solution that pays for them. And again, I would defer to Rob and Sarah for comment on how big we can potentially go. I mean, we've had extensive discussions, and while what you're telling me, Commissioner, is certainly what we would like to hear as emergency services community, you know, I have to defer to, you know, my leadership team and let them have input into this as well.
One last question. I'm not
I had
gonna
one
ask
more
anymore.
too.
Okay.
Take your time.
Mentioned federal government. So what effect, if there was a major federal government shutdown, would that have any effect on the grant at all?
This grant is funded through its termination. So even in the recent federal shutdown, the grant's still funded.
So the money still?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And I think Kingsley would like to say something.
One more, and then unless Court has one more. We're talking these numbers, and I'm sort of with Wayne on this whole thing. You know, you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly bear, I guess. But if you go like 40 or 30 or 20, can you even hire that many?
We're going to run it as hard as we can. And
I mean, can you? I have a concern that you could hire more. How many do you think, honestly, you could hire a year that are qualified that would make good?
So that's an unknown. We know it's a challenged labor market out there. There's so much market saturation for these folks, paramedics, firefighters, whatever it is, that's a fair question. But what I would tell you is, as we will always do, if we're given a charge, we will give everything we got to execute that. Now, what we know is if you decide it's 48, the total number we need for the companies that have asked, if we can only hire 24 of those, that's the grant. That's where it ends up. So the failure to execute because of market availability will not jeopardize the 24. We would surrender 24 positions dollars, but it would not jeopardize the grant.
Okay, so if we end up hiring 30, we wouldn't be charged for the under 10.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
No, we would not.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I've got one last question, and then hopefully we can make a motion on this. But we've talked about pushing the SAFER grant. The problem we need something now, and if we push this in a year, how many? I mean,
That was a suggestion.
a suggestion. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. We talked about it. You know, and I didn't. So if we push that a year, I don't think. I guess I don't know what number we think. I guess I'm confused by that, because my thought is I'll tell you right out, I'm looking at option 6, instead of asking a question, I'm looking at option 6 for 24 firefighters, but what I would actually make the suggestion, instead of hiring 2 battalion chiefs, we only hire 1, so we're putting more boots actually on the ground. And then I think we can look at the staffing cost, because I know we've talked about the 48 versus 72. Maybe that brings that a little bit down. But that 398 is about half of the $800,000. And so we're putting some money there, and maybe that cost can come down just a little bit. The remaining can go over to the EMS, so we can bring some of that in and fund the EMS. I don't think we talk about that today. But what I'm looking at that is, if we look at this today and say, okay, hey, we fund $400,000 out of that $800,000 pool. Next year during session, we find some way to do a fire tax or fee, whatever that looks like, so that it's covering more than that $2 million that we need down the road, because we know that funding's not going to come in next year. The funding's going to come in the following year. So we know we have to cover that $400,000 for 2 years within our budget. So really looking at that's taking that $800,000 and making it go away, and probably some more of that $800,000, because there's, you know, the increases in pay and all of that. So that's what I'm looking at, because my fear is if we move this down the road, we're going to be in a worse situation a year from now, because if I understand correctly, we can only apply for the SAFER grant once a year. So
once every 3 years. If it's
no, but I
awarded.
mean, it only comes out once a year.
Yes, that's correct.
So
Normally at
if
this
we didn't
time
do
of
it
the year-
right now, we'd have to wait till next year to do
That
this.
is correct.
Okay. So I knew you wanted to say something. I'm sorry, Mr. Poole.
No, thank you, Commissioner. I've been sitting here listening, and I was going to start out by saying this is a matter of the gravest urgency, but I really think you get it based on what we've heard here this morning. I was also suggested by a couple people, don't mention fire tax. Well, the president of the commissioners mentioned it.
Thank you.
At least two people this morning from my comments mentioned it. And things are not good. I mean, I hate to use an analogy, but it's not a pizza delivery. If it doesn't get there, people could die, and I believe people have. I'll tell a story here that is true. Back in the 1980s, before we had personnel issues, the president of the Washington County Commissioners died because it took an ambulance between 15 and 20 minutes to get to him when he had chest pains. And thank you.
Commissioners' thoughts, or Mr. Moncrief? Go ahead.
Dave, a question for you. If we put in for, say, 30 people, and we hired 15 in year one, could we hire the rest of them in year two?
No, we have a 180-day window to execute the grant. So from the time of notification, that's when the timer starts. So we have 6 months to hire them, and at that point, that's
Oh, I
the mark.
misunderstood you then. So you only have 6 months to hire. I was going to go with a little bit higher option in court, maybe, just thought process. So we can't hire them. We probably can't hire 30 or 35 people.
So let me take you back the way we talked last week, how we would execute this grant. We would do this in 2 phases, at least 2 phases. We would execute the first attempt at hiring almost immediately. So if what we're doing right now is work in preparation that we may get permission to submit. So on March 22nd, we're going to hit submit. If we submit this grant, we're going to continue to work for hiring, assuming or hoping that we get a award approval in June. It's around about that time. We get award approval, we'll be ready. We're going to hit your door as short a time as we can with approval to go out and advertise. We're going to hire, let's say it's 28, say it's 48. We're going to try to hire half of them, at least half of them. Maybe at that large a number, we'd probably try it in 3 hirings. And as long as they're on board, they're hired prior to the 180th day, we're okay. So for us, we would at least be looking at 2 ways. We would hire initially and come back probably 3 months later and execute a second hiring.
Gotcha.
I have a question now. And I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this. Battalion chiefs, are they working managers? Do they go on calls as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. The other question, I would favor the larger option 7 that's presented here. We're not going to have these firefighters hired on July 1st.
Makes sense.
So we're not going to have the actual first full year cost. We might not be notified of the grant until June, maybe. So we might have until December, the full 6 months to hire all of those firefighters. So our first year cost is likely going to be a lot less than this. And for the difference between the 2 options, $50,000, I think in a budget of our size, I think we can find that $50,000 in savings. I would favor the larger option that's presented.
My concern of looking at that initial thing, the $800,000 of what was, and if I'm incorrect by writing these numbers down, is we have to not just look at this as the budget item, but we have to look at the next step of the EMS and those 8 companies. And from what was said today is 84% of all of our calls come out from EMS and 17% for fire. So we need to make sure that we have money for EMS, not just looking at this $450,000 is going to be 2.3. We've got to look at the EMS side of it also. And that's why I came to line 6 is we have that $800,000. If I say 400 is going to fire and 400 is going to EMS at this point, until we can get to that fire tax indoor fee or whatever service tax or fee that we have to look at, that's why I was looking at option 6.
Well, you're certainly right in that regard that, as we mentioned a couple times over, the downside to SAFER is it doesn't involve EMS. And I don't know of any other agenda item in my 3 years that's had this much conversation, which is good.
Agreed.
I'd like to have that conversation about EMS too. I kind of think that, and that's okay that, the firefighter side of the equation got top billing today, and we're under a deadline for their grant. That's fine. But I hope we can have that conversation on EMS to this level. some point in the future.
I think we have to, I think aren't we at a motion here for this safer grant? Because 22nd is the deadline. We don't have a meeting next week.
We either do it today or the next meeting, that would give you.
I'm okay.
And if it's all right,
You have something?
sorry.
Sure.
But I'm still confused on
I don't think it matters if we apply for the option 6 or option 7 at this point. Did you say you wouldn't be able to, it would be tough to find 28 firefighters in 6 months?
It certainly will present a challenge,
why
but
would-
don't base it on that.
So if we
You
applied
base
for
it on where you
option
need to
7,
be. It's our job to execute the
I
plan.
understand.
so if we supported option 7, you're going to know in 3 or 4 months if we can move forward with all of them or not.
And we are not charged for them.
Right.
That is correct.
So if we find 20, we're not billed for the 8 on the grant.
I think the comment that we're hearing is the 25% we have to pay takes up more than
Right.
400,000. It would short the EMS companies. I
and
think
we-
that's
No,
the
I wouldn't
concern.
take it from the EMS companies. I didn't realize that's where you were going. I think we have other adjustments in our budget, other positions that we could save and not fill those positions and focus that on emergency services. I think that's a top priority, emergency services.
I just want to leave one comment.
How can we
here.
forward fund, and I don't know what the number is for emergency services, but if we have 800,000 a year going into our budget for apparatus, how can we take and forward fund the emergency services side another 400,000?
That's what we're looking at, is you're saying this cost is $400,000, you have 800, I take 400 in fire and I use 400 for EMS, then I'm not taking anything else out of the general, because if we're looking at our total operating budget, we're already hurting. So I don't know if we can find $50,000 when you look at the added increase that we have from the Board of Ed that they want, and then you've got all the other added increases and,
I think we can.
So that's where I'm saying I want to stay at the 400. And the problem with asking for the 2 extra or 4 extra firefighters is we have to apply for those 4. We can't say, hey, we can't afford it now. We have to apply. And if we get those 4 extra, we have to pay for them. And it might be $50,000 now, but it's $300,000 in 4 years.
But that would be a question for me. We're talking between option 6 and 7. I would look over there at Sarah Graves and look over here to Rob Slocum. It sounds like we're gonna do 6 or 7. Y'all suggestions?
Well, there's something that we've heard from the commissioners, and that's why it's in here, is $95,000 for accounting. So that's in addition to Commissioner Montelschmidt's comments. There's also $100,000 there that needs to be accounted for accounting, and hopefully that accounting will find savings that'll be reinvested into the system. So right now you're going to hear Sarah's presentation, and the comments are that it's a very tough budget. We're still sinking, quite frankly. We're not swimming yet in that budget. So that's where we are. Maybe after you hear that, you'll have more direction.
These options are presented. Okay, option 6 has 2 battalion chiefs.
Correct.
And when you submit that grant, do you have to specifically put in that grant you're going to hire 2 battalion chiefs?
I would have to defer to Director Hart on that one. He's our grant guy on that particular page.
Yes, the grant would not cover those 2 positions. However, in our description in the narrative portion of the application where we describe how we implement the grant, we would include those descriptions.
Not including the 2 battalion chiefs in the grant, would that have any effect on obtaining the grant for the firefighters? Do you have to include that in the grant in order to qualify for the grant? Okay, so there's some money. Okay. So they wouldn't be covered by the SAFER grant. That would be county would have to come up with that funding for those 2 positions.
The battalion chief wouldn't be deciding which companies the firefighters go to, would they? The battalion chief is the supervisor.
Right.
Okay.
That would be decided.
I think there's
Do we have anyone currently in DES or maybe the association that could serve with that role or not?
As the battalion chiefs?
As the supervisor, yeah. Like right now, who's our supervisor for the special ops?
We do that through Sam Anderson, the operations manager.
Okay.
I think there's some misunderstanding, because the way this is laid out, a battalion chief because it's saying it's 193,000. It's saying year one, we're only paying 48. So from my understanding on this chart, we are getting funding for battalion chiefs.
Yeah, and I've got it factored that way. I did not know that particular part of that
So
conversation.
you're saying we would not get funding for battalion chiefs. We would only get funding if they were a firefighter. Okay, so, but and then another discussion, we said a battalion chief, if they're a firefighter, then they could also get, they would be a dual role. So would a dual role battalion chief who is also a firefighter be able to get funded?
I'm going to guess no.
Okay, so then that,
So
that completely changes.
It does.
Because that's $200,000 year one. And so in that scenario, I mean, I would adjust mine to make it 26 or 28 firefighters, and then we've got to figure out something on that battalion chief. That's $200,000 that could be going to firefighters versus a battalion chief.
Right.
Dave and I have had this discussion about the battalion chiefs, and I'll respect Dave's opinion. I would like to challenge the situation respectfully to say perhaps we could look at existing staff to manage that. But that's not something I would want to say or sell you at this point. But
That's correct. There are conversations that we can have after we move forward.
Again, this is not
as far as the battalion chiefs go,
An
yes.
opportunity there for us, another savings. And then, I guess, I don't know, I'd have to ask the commissioners, where could we use that savings?
Well, as it sounds like we're at an option, right now, we're at option 7, a motion for option 7, is that correct? Or
It's going to be adjusted because of the option. But the next question is, it says the air-P, would that be covered under this?
That would.
Okay,
That-
so
that should meet the.
Okay, so those two would be covered, okay.
Which one was that?
So under option 6, it has 2 air Ps. I just wanted to make sure they were also covered on the SAFER grant because that was 162,000, we're only paying 40, just like you discovered with the 193, we're paying 48. So then what I would make the suggestion, and is everyone out with making a motion on this?
I would say move forward with the motion.
Okay, so then what I would make the motion is, and we count those 2 are technically firefighters, right? Hold on, the air Ps are the technically firefighters.
They are.
But we don't have to say, I'm gonna hire this and this, we could say firefighters.
We would hire them all as firefighters. It's just
Outstanding.
a station assignments.
Then what I'm gonna do is say 20, I'm gonna say, I make the motion to hire, for the SAFER grant, to hire 28 firefighters. It's a option 6 adjusted. I move
Okay, that's what
I moved the 2 battalion chiefs to firefighters, and moved the 2 air P to firefighters, since they're all firefighters. Then, so I make the motion to hire 28 firefighters under the SAFER grant.
Under option 6.
Well, option 6 adjusted.
Okay.
So
I'd second that with discussion.
All right, I have a first and a second discussion.
I have 2 questions here. I think he's referring to option 7. I think he just mentioned 20.
no, option 6 adjusted
Modified.
because you have two battalion chiefs in option 6. No battalion chiefs, moving them up to firefighters.
I don't think it matters at that.
So Terry, option 7 would be 32, would be a motion with 30. That's my only question I have. Do we make an option 7 with 32 firefighters adjusted to 32?
Well,
And understand that the battalion chief salaries are higher than the firefighters, so that 450,
It would
even though the
change.
number's
Right.
32, would still be something less than that.
We have more discussion. Go
Could
ahead.
you restate that motion?
So my original because the way I understand it, the SAFER grant only covers for firefighters. So the battalion chiefs, we shouldn't talk about those. We need to be talking about firefighters. So my option was 28 firefighters.
28, okay. Which is option 7 less the.
The battalion chiefs, so it's option 7 or option 6 modified, which either way.
Modifying option 7 would give you 32 firefighters.
The motion right now is for option 6 adjusted.
Option 7 gives you 28. It says it right
Is there
there.
discussion, or you want to
have to
abandon that
modify
and go to option 7?
The option number, I think, at this point is
Yeah,
irrelevant.
it doesn't matter.
Just so you know which one.
The
they're
motion
moving
is to
the
hire
number.
28.
28 firefighters under the SAFER grant.
So basically, my discussion was you want to hire 28 or 32. That was the only discussion I had. I seconded it, but I still wanted to.
I think we stick with the options on our paper so that we kind of.
28
don't
is
think
7
you-
stations, 32 is 8, with no battalion chiefs included.
Right.
Yeah, so it's, no
That's
matter
just
what
the
we're
difference.
adjusting, so battalion chiefs are gone.
So there's a motion for option 6, but a total of 20 firefighters, the battalion chiefs and the air people are gone, they're moved up.
They're all firefighters.
They're all. So is there any more discussion on that?
I thought we were going to listen to staff.
You made a motion and there was a second, so we have to either, yeah, sorry about that. I thought you heard that.
With discussion, and the only question I had was, 28 or 32?
Well,
I did have another question or discussion. So 28 to 32, and then the 2 battalion chiefs are removed. So can we have discussion at another time on the money that was earmarked for the battalion chiefs to see if we can move that over to the emergency services side?
I'm comfortable with that, and the reason why I bumped it from 24 to 28 is because of that, so we're getting the firing fighters, that's why I did that, so that we're,
Then we can have some further discussion to see
and then,
Yeah,
some savings to
exactly, 'cause
help
EMS?
more with our EMS company.
Gentlemen, there's a first and a second with my terminology, option 6 adjusted to 28 firefighters.
I know we wanted to do this to, I guess, to amend that this money comes out of the 800,000. So if I can, I'd like to amend my motion. So it's 28 firefighters for the SAFER grant. The amount to pay does come out of the apparatus fund CIP.
In a future discussion on EMS.
And yes, we'll.
That's fine. All right.
I'll second that.
Also, I would like to just have a future discussion with how we can be extremely efficient throughout the whole county with our emergency services and our fire and rescue, and I'll talk to you about that later, Dave.
Okay. Could I offer one comment on the motion?
Yes, please.
So if we increase it by 1 to 29, we can take 1 firefighter for the airport and still completely staff 7 volunteer stations. The cost is minimal.
Amend your motion again.
I'll amend my motion. 29 firefighters under the SAFER grant, money coming.
We're growing.
Money coming from the apparatus fund and the CIP.
I'll second it.
First and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, commissioners and people.
I have a question. We're assuming that we're getting the SAFER grant, and that's a big assumption.
That's why we currently, right now, we're hiring with the approval of the SAFER grant.
Okay, so we have to come back if,
If we don't get the SAFER grant, we gotta cross our fingers and we gotta figure a lot of stuff out.
thank you.
And Mr. Poole, if we don't receive the SAFER grant, we have already shown that we can earmark money 4 years out. So then it's going to be our job to figure out how we're going to put a plan together to support the companies with that amount of money that we've already promised.
Thank you.
So the only other question I've got.
And it's going to be up, I think someone said it earlier, I forget, maybe Mr. Gargano, if he's still here. We need to have meetings quarterly, whatever. The commissioners need to be informed as to what we need to do. Then we need to use our foresight, not our hindsight.
So we have the commissioner's permission through the Office of Grants Managed to make application to the grant with this motion as well, correct?
With me, it is, yeah.
I just want to make sure that's in the minutes so that
Yeah.
grants
Glad to hear
management
that.
is covered.
Say it again, Dave.
We have permission from the commissioner. We do not need to come back to seek
Correct.
permission to actually make the formal application.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Thank you, gentlemen, everyone. Round of applause for everybody for what you've done today. Thank you.